So power tools. And just for those of you that do not know, I have practices in Connecticut, 4 locations, and we do vision therapy in all of them. So let me kind of go over the overview of what we're talking about. So there's some amazing giants in the field that many of you might have heard the names, but not really know what they did or what they contributed to optometry. But many of them talked about different models of prescribing. They talked specifically about lenses and prisms, our power tools, and then utilizing the optometric assessment. Some of it is that OEP 21-point assessment to look at what the findings are so that we can determine what the best prescription would be. And then I'm going to go over some keys to prescribing. So there's different philosophies on how you prescribe and different models. So I'm going to go over those and then talk about some specific cases, or more routine cases, as well as amblyopia or strabismus, and some of the more complicated Streff syndrome, autism, and TBI cases. And then I also want to really talk about vision therapy and how we can utilize lenses and prisms in vision therapy. That's something that I think is underutilized, and they can be very, very powerful in facilitating treatment and speeding up the course of vision therapy. All right, so here's some of the names, some of the giants in the fields. I hope you have all gotten to know Skeffington and Skeffington's 4 circles, but that was back in the 1920s, and he talked a lot about lenses, and I will discuss, some of his teachings. Harman, Getman, and Gazelle, that was back in the 70s, 60s, 70s. They also talked about some models for prescribing. Elliot Forrest talked a lot about the stress model and how we want to prescribe to reduce stress. Kraskin, the Kraskin Invitational Symposium was just last month as well, and he talked a lot about utilizing prisms. OEP has a little monograph by him that talks about, I think, power tools in action, and talks about the prisms and different ways to utilize prisms. Hans Selye also discussed the stress model, so I think it's important to follow his model of looking at what happens when a system is stressed and where it goes, and then how we can utilize lenses to help with that. Marty Birnbaum, who taught at SUNY for many, many years, his book on near-point disorders is kind of a summary of all of those greats that came before him, and I highly recommend reading that. That was actually, as a quick aside, my work study project while at SUNY was to actually type his book, because he handwrote it on legal pad. Just paid pads and pads of writing that was crossed out and arrows and everything, and that was my work study job, was to type that in. So I actually got to learn this quite in depth while in school, but I don't think I remembered any of it until I reread it later. Al Sutton, Bruce Wolfe, as in Wolf Wands, Mel Kaplan. I actually had the opportunity to work for Mel Kaplan when I first got out of school. So he talks a lot about prisms, and he has a book or 2 about prisms and how he utilized them to work with those on the autism spectrum. John Streff, as I mentioned. Gus Forkiotis is a name that's not well known, but he actually was in Connecticut, and I spent some time working with him in a study group, and he was pretty brilliant. So I learned a lot about prescribing from him, as well as Paul Harris. I did a rotation down in Baltimore with Paul. So I learned a lot from him, as well as Arnie Sherman, who also taught at SUNY. Steve Gallup lectures a lot on lenses and prisms, and he's got an interesting take on it, as well as Smith. Merrill Bowen passed away, but he also coined the term microprism. So he did a lot with utilizing prisms. You'll probably hear about Bill Padula, who's also from Connecticut. So he does a lot with oblique prisms for postural work in mostly or mainly the TBI population. Len Press also talks a bit about lenses and prisms. So I'm going to just go through and give you some of the philosophy, beginning with Skeffington. So we'll talk about the Skeffington 4 circles. And hopefully you should all know what those are. Really, vision is a compilation or the emergent from all of these four systems. So centering is related to our convergence vergence system. Identification is related to our accommodative system. Anti-gravity is our postural control, proprioception. And speech auditory is our language and communication. So I think it's really important to understand Skeffington's four circles, because anytime you're using a lens or prism, it will have an effect on all of these other systems. So that's another part of how and why we might prescribe, is how we can make changes in those other systems that are positive. We certainly don't want to prescribe something that's going to create imbalance or problems with processing. Oops. Okay, there we go. So let's talk about Skeffington's model of near-point stress. He talked about it, and these are some key terms, which is why this slide is a little wordy. Reading is a biologically unacceptable task. We are not meant to sit there and read for long periods, but it is imposed by our culture to have near work demands, and that's completely incompatible with our physiology and will provoke a stress response. So the theory is we mostly are out and about, or we're looking and searching for food, or we're just engaging in the environment. We are never really meant to sit there and do extended near work. Part of what happens then, if that's creating stress on the system, it causes our convergence to localize closer than accommodation. So we can go into almost like an ESO posture, and then we over accommodate, and then we end up with myopia. So, and other things. So we're going to kind of talk about that whole process. When we do read or sit on our screens or on our cell phones, we're immobilized, and our bodies are designed to move. So if we're sitting still and not moving, it actually can create stress and tension in our whole body. It will actually increase our mental thought processes. So we're going to be thinking and being engaged in abstract thinking, because we're looking at words and typically letters, which are abstract symbols, and we're in an artificial setting. So it's actually going to have an impact, and typically a negative impact on our whole body. So what he says is this effort towards resolving the mismatch between vergence and accommodation leads to decreased information processing, impaired comprehension, and decreased efficiency. So that inefficiency of visual functioning will cause a number of things: asthenopia, poor visual attention, avoidance, myopia, astigmatism, and or suppression or binocular problems. So he talked about it as that avoidance or flight, intense focus, which would be the fight, become myopic, or you can be in the flow. So there's ways to actually modify how we're looking and how we're seeing, and that typically involved a plus lens to ease that mismatch between having to stay focused at a fixed distance. So he felt that the management of near-point vision disorders is the heart of optometric practice and an essential element of high-quality optometric care. And then only through the application of specific lenses that will help to meet the biological demands and arranging conditions for learning, so through vision therapy, that would be the only way that you would have an individual be able to attain success in a modern culture. And that there's typically only one completely proper lens that will satisfy that avoidance reaction and will help that person be able to engage. So he talked a lot about the optimal lens, and that optimal lens has nothing to do with the refractive status. And it's really determined by understanding the entire problem, like a clinical understanding of what our phoreas are, what the vergence ranges are, what the refractive error is showing, And that's going to give you an indication of what's going on with that entire system. And that what we want to do is catch it early and find the optimal lens that will relieve the stress or counter the stress on that individual. So I can make these slides available if anybody's interested. Again, I just thought it was important to have all the detail, but I'm kind of paraphrasing what the key points are. So that was Skeffington. Getman spend a lot of time talking about development and how we have general movement patterns. So that's, you can think of more of the gross movement. So we need to learn how to move our head, body, arms, legs, and feet. And the eyes is kind of just the steering mechanism. It's kind of like, okay, let's look over here, let's move that way. If you think about primitive reflexes, and I believe you've gotten some information on primitive reflexes as well, you can always look up, there's some really good people that talk about that. But looking at those movement patterns and whether or not they're developed can actually impact our eye movements. And we kind of understand that. You've got the gross motor, then you have the fine motor. So then you have more specialized movement patterns. And then you have the ocular motor patterns. And there's specific patterns that will help you to engage in the environment, make quick and efficient visual movements to where you need to go, and be able to learn how to communicate and establish a good visual and auditory connection through speech from what you're navigating in your environment and how your eye movements are directed towards what's important. And then he also talked about visualization patterns, which is like the end stage in terms of development for being able to substitute actions and speech through time. So again, a little bit of theory, but I think it's important for understanding how and why we might prescribe lenses and prisms. And he talked a lot about developmental prisms and utilizing lenses and prisms because they're unique tools that can change spatial judgments, time actually, and decisions. And the first impact is going to be on posture. And that's really important. And that will come into play a little bit more. Other slides here. So Gazelle also talked about the importance of vision development, and that's going to be the dominant process. So how you see is how you're going to be engaging, and how well you can use your visual system, how well developed it is going to impact your ability to read, write, draw. And so if there's distortions in your posture or in those gross motor patterns. So if you think back on Getman, he had these gross motor patterns. If you had problems there, then it actually will affect vision development. And then vice versa too. We also see how people with eye turns will actually have postural shifts and head turns and all that. So we want to be looking at posture, head movement, the visual system in context to development and posture. So that's where we're going with all this. And that vision will guide the development in other areas. So he talked about finding the proper lens that will allow either the child or the adult to be able to engage with the environment and to have that vision develop and or not impact the rest of the body. Daryl Boyd Harmon, I'm sure you've heard about the Harmon working distance, and that's the most comfortable and physiologically ideal place to put reading material. He talked about the fact that a convex lens will allow somebody to continue to do a near task without the avoidance urge. So again, wordy, but what it says, suggesting is that this optimal lens, which is a plus lens, will improve posture, reduce back tension, will make it easier for the individual to engage and learn. And he did a lot of studies that actually measured galvanic skin response, respiratory rate, blood pressure, neck tonicity in the neck and back. while wearing lenses. So plus lenses, minus lenses, and then no lenses. And all of those studies showed that plus lenses were relaxing to the entire body. So we'll go over a little case here. Michael is what I call a developmental case, and I pretty much get these almost daily, I would say. So, or more often actually, probably a couple times a day. So he's an 8-year-old boy that's having some difficulties in school, errors in copying, squinting, reversals, 20/20 essentially at distance, and 20/25 at near, a little bit off with the left eye, normal near point of convergence. But if you look, really the biggest thing is those extraocular muscles are not where they should be for an 8-year-old. A lot of head movement and not great saccades. So I would be looking at that as a developmental case. So we can go back to Getman, and he said, well, you should expect certain development. Well, this kid hasn't gotten there. On auto refraction, he's showing some minus, although objectively, or I only found a plus a quarter, and this happens all the time. We see minus on the auto and then plus with a retinoscope, and then really not taking much of a prescription. You can also see that I do Bell or some form of near retinoscopy, and there was a little bit of a lead, but then his NRA PRA was reduced. Amps were reduced, was taking a plus 50 on the FCC, but he was also failing plus and minus flippers. Had decent stereo, but not great, failed the base in flippers, and showing mild exo at distance and near. Because he was young and because I wasn't getting solid findings, that's why I did the rages with a prism bar. So ocular health is normal. I'm going to just show you his, oh, I thought I had his other picture there. But so most people would say, there's not much to prescribe there. And you could make the case to actually just recommend vision therapy. What we ended up doing was giving him some prism and low plus. And honestly, I could have given him just plus 50 as well, because giving a little bit of plus can actually help with that development. But I also recommended doing vision therapy activities. His brother was in vision therapy, so we said, just do that program. And then I would see him back in 3 months. If after 3 months things weren't a lot better, then we would consider putting him in vision therapy as well. So a lot of people ask about that 0.37 half in, and that was something that I thought people were a little nuts 30 years ago, but it's probably one of the most common prescriptions that I give out. John Straff and Gus Forkiotis use that prescription a lot, and they talked about it as being a developmental and stress relieving prescription. And usually what I will do is some form of performance test. So I'll put that on and then recheck the Bell and or check stereo and see if it's any better. All right, so let's talk about Elliot Forrest. He talked about the autonomic nervous system. And I think that's actually something that I was not really aware of or really thinking about. I mean, we learned about it. Certainly we had to know about it in neuroanatomy and physiology, but I never really thought about it in terms of how it truly affected vision. I mean, yes, you learn, okay, pupils will constrict and or dilate, whether it's you're on the parasympathetic or sympathetic dominant side, but it's much more complex than that, and it actually can really have an effect on our visual system and the development of that visual system, and then whether or not we become nearsighted or farsighted or generally how we function. Actually, if you're interested in the autonomic nervous system and how to address it, that's the whole field of syntonic optometry. So looking at photolight therapy and how it can modulate the autonomic nervous system. I'll touch upon that briefly later. But the sympathetic is obviously not really meant for chronic periods. It's meant to just get us engaged. It's like, okay, there's something there, we have to fight or flight, and that's it. The neuroendocrine system is slower. It will maintain sympathetic arousal for long periods, but we don't really want that. What happens is, in today's society, and we're seeing it incredibly with COVID, I mean, so many people are just so stressed for long, long periods that we're actually engaging that endocrine system and stressing out our adrenals. The cortisol levels are higher than they should be. And then we end up in what Selye called a general adaptation syndrome, so that we kind of get used to that stress. And that's not really healthy. So what really happens is there's that initial stress, the stress reaction continues, the adaptation ensues, and then you get to a stage of exhaustion. I like that little picture, but really that's what so many people are in. So, okay, when you're in that state of exhaustion, what can we do to help? And very often Plus Lens can help. I'm left and right, we're prescribing a lot more Plus lenses for people that are on their screens all day long. And it does relieve a lot of that stress. So Elliott Forrest talked about that the near point stress response is activated in some more than others, and that those those people that are more stressed, it has to do with certain factors. So psychology, just their general psychology, their thought patterns, how intensely they attend, their general attitude, personality, value system, their self-image, looking good by studying hard, and then perceived controllability, perceived predictability, and then generally their central peripheral organization. I thought this was really fascinating because Elliott Forrest was back in the 70s. So you're talking 50 years ago. He's talking about a lot of what psychologists talk about today. I mean, there's just so many theories that talk about now how people feel about themselves and how that affects their general behavior, the whole perceived controllability. Marty Seligman talked a lot about that in some of his work, which was like in the 80s. So it's pretty amazing that Elliott Forrest, an optometrist, was talking about all of these things and how vision is just like the microcosm of what's happening in that general body, and that near point stress can have a really great impact. And we all know about central peripheral, if we're over focusing, and that's something that I tell a lot of my patients now, because they're all focused on these tiny screens for hours, and then these little kids are focused on it. I teach them about being aware of the periphery. So even when you're looking at your phone, how many of us are just looking at the phone and oblivious to everything else? So can you be aware of the whole room while you're looking at the screen? So those are just some things that can actually decrease the stress on the system. Well, here's like the caricature of it, but those with the most concentration, strong drive for achievement, striving to get work done in a short amount of time, will invest greater attentional energy and then generate a higher stress activation. So those that are highly focused, logical, analytical reasoning, intellectualizing, internal verbalizing will detune the environment, and then they end up having more esophoria and an increase in accommodation, and then possibly increased myopia. None of you know anything about that strong drive for achievement and to concentrate for boards or anything like that, or for your future. Anyhow, let's talk about a stress relieving case. So what can we do when we have an individual that's undergoing stress? So this was an 11-year-old. Oops, let me come back. Again, a little bit of minus on auto, some head and jaw movements on persistent SCADs, good NPC, some reduced PRA, decent amps, minus projector, failing flippers, and then passes prism flippers, but reduced stereo, and then high base out, really low base in. So an ocular health normal. I like to do a Van Orden star and gyroscope, although with COVID, we're actually trying to keep people in the office less. So we're actually only doing the Van Orden star now instead of both. But you can see some disorganization. The two eyes aren't really working together, maybe even a little vertical on the gyroscope. So, you're talking about a system that is observably stressed. We also do keystone skills and showing more of an esophoric pattern. So what would we prescribe for this one? Again, I like my 0.37 half in. I like plus 50, but she liked the plus 50, and that's what we RX'd. And this is very common. This is another kind of case that we're seeing a lot of, particularly with all these kids that are on distance learning. Mom didn't want to do anything in terms of additional treatment. I was a little concerned about the very poor recoveries on base in, but we started with the plus 50 and she was happy. So let me just talk a little bit more in terms of theory. We've got Elliot Forrest. He actually talked about looking at the body in 3 steps, so that you've got the head, torso, and then the pelvis. And when you look at all of that, there's all of these compensations. So if you see somebody with a head tilt one way, you'll very often see this compensation. So you'll see the right shoulder come up, and then you might see the left hip come up, because otherwise that whole system's going to be imbalanced. You can start watching. I mean, sometimes it's really subtle. You can also look too on where the shirt sits. Sometimes you'll see this. But start noticing the different postures and, what visual pattern they have, and see if it shows up as a compensatory pattern. So, it's, if somebody has a vertical, you'll often see some head tilts and torques. If you see that they're aniso, you might see one. Again, it's very subtle. I'm exaggerating, but you'll see that, say, the right side of the face will come forward compared to the left. So again, just something to think about in terms of this model. Kraskin also talked about stress, and this is you can look it up. Darrell Boyd Harmon did a study. It was called the Texas Project. There's a few people that have done some interesting school projects. Tony Orfield did one, Darrell Boyd Harmon, Paul Harris did a Baltimore study as well, where they looked at what the number of children that had vision problems entering school was, say in kindergarten or 1st grade, and then how many by the 3rd or 4th grade. And really what that showed is that an ever increasing number of kids had a visual dysfunction. So it might have started at, say, 1 and 5 in 1st grade, but by 3rd, 4th grade, and then by 6th grade, it even quadrupled. And really, again, the prime stress agent is just the amount of close work. They have to sit still, not move, stay focused. So either they're going to go myopic, or they're going to have reduced visual efficiency, or they'll just not pay attention. And, we can look at I know a number of you, I think, or a number of the residents are doing, the SUNY residents are doing talks on myopia control, and that's a huge issue. And again, I think we're going to see a lot more myopia post-COVID. This Kraskin's model, interesting. He likened the person to a computer. I'm not as much of a fan of this model, but it's something to be aware of, to understand that we want to be able to compute freely without effort, and our body wants to come into balance. And he talked about prescribing so that the information flows freely without effort. However, he actually felt that you should prescribe in a manner that kind of pushes them in one direction. So he tended to use yoked prisms a lot, and he would say, if you over-focused, he might give you base up to make you focus even more, so that your body would say no way and come out of it. So it's just an interesting philosophy. I definitely will use that in therapy. I'm not really comfortable about giving base up to a beginning myope because I don't want them to become embedded. But again, he tended to prescribe compensatory prisms to improve. Oh, I'm sorry, this is Kaplan. Kraskin was the opposite. Kraskin tended to give prisms to force you to go in one direction, whereas Kaplan gave you prisms that improve performance. So, these are two different models. Kraskin would use things that would push the person back to a self-reorganization, and he would keep the lenses on for short periods. Kaplan tended to leave prescriptions on for long periods that were more compensatory. So he would just give base down for the CE, the convergence excess type patient. I think it's nice to look at both models and then make some observations yourself and then utilize lenses and prisms in a therapeutic program. Kraskin generally prescribed lenses to reduce stress, increase comfort, increase the sustaining ability, decrease diplopia, and improve that postural adaptation. And then eventually to protect against additional stressors or strains. So Birnbaum pretty much took and compiled in that book that I was telling you about Skeffington's model, Force model, and said that that drive for convergence to localize close accommodation is intrinsic in our culture, and it's just getting worse, and it's going to interfere with our near point visual efficiency and lead to a whole host of vision problems. And that's going to cause, and then those individuals with visual perceptual motor deficits will result in interference with development, and then visual function is going to be impacted on all of these individuals, and it'll be influenced by their personality, lifestyle, and general cognitive perceptual style. Oops. So he also brought in that Forest model, if you remember, that talked about sympathetic activation that extends, and we go into that exhaustion, and that that accommodation will lag convergence, and then they'll fatigue. So you end up with an increased ESO posture. And you can find that if you repeat tests. So, again, that's probably the most confounding to students and certainly to myself. And then it's also a challenge to explain to parents. Well, and I also work with interns, so trying to explain to an intern, okay, well, they were 7XO on the cover test, 3XO on the Von Graef, but then the Van Orden star shows XO again, or, the base out is high, but the base in is negative, like we saw. So when they're kind of all over the place, that's telling you that this is a system that's very fragile. So that binocular system is just not able to keep up. So I actually think that's actually a good thing when we see things that don't make sense, because it tells me that we have a little bit more room to get engaged and help them. So Birnbaum also talked about a few other things that I think have been discussed recently too, is looking at heredity or genetics, and they're talking a lot more about epigenetics, looking at our general anatomy, physiology, looking at nutrition. So those are all factors in near point stress. And then there's many adaptations. So again, I get that this is actually kind of very counter to what other doctors think, or other eye doctors. But really, adaptations to near point stress and just stress in general will result in myopia, hyperopia, exotropia, binocular and accommodating disorders. And very often we don't think like that. We think, well, no, that person's just myopic, or they're born myopic, or, take a hyperope. Well, they were born with 3 hyperopia, 3 diopters of hyperopia. But if you look at what Skeffington and Getman and Harmon are saying, and Birnbaum kind of summates in his book, The Management of Near Point Stress Disorders, they're saying that it was actually a result of development. So they didn't develop the good postural control or good gross motor skills, and that's why they remained hyperopic, or their demands were so great that they became myopic. And then if you look at the genetics or the heredity, it actually could be that when stressed, people in their family ended up with astigmatism or ended up with eye turns. So it's a different way to look at it than, okay, this is just what happens. But this is kind of my foundation of how I look at patients. What's happening? Are they experiencing stress? And then is it causing an avoidance, asthenopia, or some form of adaptation, with the premise that emetropia and good binocular and accommodative skills and ocular motor skills should be there by 3 to 6 months of age. So anything less than that is actually an adaptation or a stress response or inadequate development. So again, when you look at things from that model, then you're going to be less inclined to prescribe what you're measuring. So really what Birnbaum said, and this is a reiteration of what Skeffington said, that management of near-point vision disorders is really the heart of optometric practice. And that's really oftentimes what's bringing people in. And it's essential for optometrists to really engage in. So let's talk a little bit more about myopia, that it's correlated with increased reading, higher academic achievement, introspection, increased anxiety, greater passivity towards stress, decreased motor activity, abstract thinking, social awkwardness, reduced contact with the environment, mental processing, and problem solving. You know, again, it was interesting to read that that's really what it's correlated with. I don't really hear about that so much in myopia studies today, but it's certainly intuitive if we think about it. John Streff also talked quite a bit about what vision is for. And vision is always present, active, and leading when it can. So we think about that, you know, the patients that we see that are challenged in terms of development often are not utilizing vision the way they should. You know, they're looking away when they're reaching. And really, vision is how we engage with the environment. You might have heard 80% of learning comes through that visual system. I think, yes, it does. And I think it's really important to look at vision from that standpoint, that it should be guiding us. It should be engaging us in movement and in interactions with the environment. And we need to be able to meet the demands of our environment. So we should be able to see where we want to go, be able to read related to past experiences, engage, understand, and learn through how we're using our visual system. And that way we can project out into our environment and know where we're going and how to get there. He also talked about the fact that optometric care is really to treat the individual through treating his vision. So really the goal of an optometric examination is to arrive at a lens prescription, especially for near, and making the assumption that nearly all patients can benefit from lenses. So again, another concept that we don't really think about. We don't necessarily think everybody needs glasses, but in this model, yeah, you know, many people can benefit from glasses. Not all, but many more people can benefit from lenses than one would think. So really, if we're thinking about it as the lens is going to prevent stress, aid in development, and fix a vision processing problem, then we're going to be prescribing for a lot more individuals. He also talks about a visual problem will create a narrowness in attention and visual awareness, so that you have a constriction or a reduction in the amount of information that you can process and take in. And that's another thing that I think a lot of these kids are experiencing, and adults, they just get really overwhelmed. I hear that a lot from the moms too. I mean, the families are all on top of each other. You're trying to maybe work from home, then you got kids that are also learning from home. So it just becomes a much more stressful environment. It's much harder to keep track of everything and process all of that information. And very often lenses and prisms can help. In our TBI population too, the visual system is overloaded. Actually, the whole brain is kind of stressed. So all sensory input is really challenging. So very often a lens or prism can actually help just organize things visually so it's easier to process everything else. So when we think about that, lenses allow the person to be able to see and act and react more effectively. He talked about the fact that lenses have their effect on both the sensory and the motor system. So sensory, they can actually engage in the environment faster, and then that motor piece that they can actually move and develop themselves in that environment. Well, and this we'll talk about too, that lenses affect size, distance, and ambient focal. I like this too. He, came up with the acronym lenses that they are, there we go. I can't see it now. Anyway, they're learning, earning, and necessary to support efficiency and survival. So really, if we think about it, if we can provide a lens that's going to allow for that patient to be able to learn and or do their job better, then we're actually supporting them in terms of their overall efficiency and ability to thrive. Streff also talked about that the ideal lens is the minimal plus to get results. So again, that's why I tend to use the lower powers. So you want to go with just small amounts. And then he also talked about that the right lens is the one you get rid of quickly, because ideally, especially in those developmental cases or those stress relieving cases, you don't necessarily want them to become dependent on the glasses. You actually want to use those small amounts to help them have a better match between where they're looking, how they're looking, and to teach them how to look in a less stressed way. So very often they might only use them for short periods. For example, my daughter wore, I think the plus 37 half in when she was in kindergarten because she was struggling. She had some occupational therapy when she was 3 or 4. And then she didn't need them again until 4th grade when they really went from learning to read to reading to learn. And then she wore them again in 10th grade when the stress increased, and now she's in law school and wears them. So again, you can look at there's not they're not necessary for long-term use, but very often they can really help bridge that gap between where the development is and what the capacity is. And then also when there's great stresses, like now I have a lot of my patients just end up wearing just some plus lenses just for home when they have homework at the end of the day after they've been in school all day. He also talked about that there's some physiological lenses that are useful. So he prescribed a lot of plus 75 or plus 2. So for example, if it was a plus 350, he would only give a plus 2. And he said that anything greater than plus 2 or greater than -8 was pathological. And for the most part, he felt that any problem is at near for myope is because they're ESO, and that if it's an exo problem at near, that's because they're hyperopic. And really what you want to do is find the proper lens that will help with that mismatch, will improve their functioning overall. And then you would just have them in a maintenance type of prescription. So here's another case. Aiden was an 11-year-old, and he had some complaints of bedwetting. A little ESO at distance on the cover test, seeing very clearly, but you can see on auto is a +1 on the right, +225 on the left. Objective, similar, subjective, plano on that right eye and +2 on the left, but balance is at +50 and +150. PRA is a little low, amps are low for his age. and very high FCC, so taking a lot more plus, lower stereo, and then ESO in the phoropter at distance and near, very high base out, with much lower base in. So, this is an interesting case too, because if you look, he's also a little bit ESO on both VO-star and Cairo. I ended up giving this, and it's kind of interesting. I'm not even sure why I gave that. This became a big discussion point at another talk that I gave on lenses and prisms. I could have given the plus 50, plus 150, which was the binocular balance. Another option would have been to just give plus 75 in both, or I know Arnie Schulman tends to, and even Rob Fox will actually give a little bit of more plus, and then maybe even a bifocal and an asymmetric bifocal. I think there's probably at least a dozen prescriptions you could have given Aiden at that point, when he first came in. He came from far, so I think we mostly did a home program of vision therapy. But it's an interesting case. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can go. Again, I wanted to try to reduce the plus. So very often you can. Here, very interesting, he balanced at plus 50 and plus 75. And honestly, thinking about it, that's probably what I would have given or should have given in the first case, but that's really what I was shooting for, is to come up with some sort of balanced prescription. A little better on the PRA, amps are a little better, stereo stable, still ESO, ranges and recoveries are still in the same ballpark. Still a little ESO on the VO-star and tracing. We just kept going with that. He came back another 3 or 4 months later, still showing a lot of the same findings. Again, I probably would have liked him to come in for vision therapy, but the ranges and recoveries were a little bit better, still a little bit reduced on the base in, and not 9 ESO on the foria. Now he's 7 ESO. Oh, and the big one for me is actually when the stereo comes up. So the stereo actually is a lot better. So he got 9 out of 9. I think he was just drawing the gyroscope, but the Van Orden star, again, still a little ESO, maybe a little bit more organized. He actually has since moved to Florida, but he really liked the 0.37. I think I did try to show him the asymmetric, and at one point he did get the 0.5 and 0.75, but Mom said that he tended to still prefer the 0.37. Again, at the end, we can discuss some cases. There's still just a lot more to cover. What I'll do is maybe we'll talk for another 10 minutes, and then we'll take like a 3-minute bathroom break when I get up to exam. So let me talk a little bit about Gus Forkiotis. As I said, I had the opportunity to work with him. Again, not real well known, but really brilliant. I mean, he would actually just look at somebody. He'd just kind of assess them and watch them walk, and he would tell you what their prescription was. It was wild. But he basically said vision's dominant. Vision is motor, and it's expressed in the individual's motor response. So he just would look how they'd walk, talk, stand. He'd watch them write. He'd ask questions and get a sense of their thinking pattern and overall personality, and he would be able to come up with a prescription that would help them. So he tended not to prescribe what he measured or what their refraction was, but he really was looking at, okay, how can we make this individual more comfortable? And he also talked a lot about secondary symptoms. So it's not about blur. He talked about looking at breathing patterns, the gastrointestinal problems, head and neck and jaw aches. He did a lot with TMJ. He also talked about, and this was really stuck with me, when we see things kind of blur out, which is the visual snow, which a lot of people are talking about. He was talking about visual snow 30 years ago. He also talked about apparent movement. So right before somebody becomes myopic, they might start to notice that things look like they're getting closer and further. So if you think about that Vidal optometer, you can look at what their accommodative status was. So he was saying that if things appeared like they were getting closer or smaller, or changing in size and distance, that was an indication that they were in accommodative stress and that they would most likely become myopic. He talked about all of the stressors in our environment and how the decreased movement. He talked about the bucket babies, how babies are just put from the car seat into the house and then back into the car seat into the stroller, so they really weren't moving. He talked about the increases in technology, how we're all looking at screens and we've got our eyes down and stay seated, not move. We tend to be very tense as a society and then not breathing. And when you don't get nice deep breaths, you've got decreased blood and oxygen supply to the brain. And he felt that was creating many vision problems. He also talked about fast foods and how they were so, we were so nutritionally deprived. Time pressure, which is something that actually, if you recall, we talked about way back in the beginning, that time was a factor in some of the earlier talks with Getman. So he said that time is a big factor. When we feel pressed for time, that actually creates problems with our visual system. Again, you wouldn't necessarily think about that, but yes, it certainly can, because then it's going to disrupt our space-time management. And then if our time's compressed, then our space can be compressed. So then we might have poor body coordination or poor depth perception. He also talked about fatigue in general, whether it's lack of sleep or just eye fatigue, overdoing it, not taking breaks. He talked about lenses and prisms as a change in the light light energy entering the eyes. The brain has to make a change as a result of it. So he felt that the lenses and prisms create a change in brain function and ultimately the whole nervous system. And again, if you think back at Darrell Boyd Harmon's studies, where the actual tonicity was increased with minus lenses, decreased with plus lenses, and there was changes in breathing function, there was a total change in the nervous system. Also, with when we talked about Cellier and that autonomic nervous system response. Gus also talked about changes that can produce a conscious awareness of a previous habitual pattern nervous system. So he was a big fan of putting lenses on and then asking the patient to feel, how do you feel? What does your breath feel like? Do you feel more anxious, less anxious? And his feeling was that you want to find what's going to be safe and comfortable for that patient, but then increasing the demands and increasing the changes. So he would use higher and higher power lenses and prisms so that you can actually guide the patient's bodily control, function, and performance. He loved using the word judicious. He often said treatment involves the judicious application of therapy lenses. And he actually was a big proponent of changing how the individual sees, thinks, and controls his body. I will tell you, I did some vision therapy with him, and most of the sessions ended up with me crying because it was really challenging. I mean, he really tended to push you. He was kind of gruff, but it was actually a really effective tool to really improve and increase my awareness. I mean, I definitely recognized that I was suppressing in areas. I was not really as aware of everything in the room, and using lenses and prisms in a therapeutic fashion really helped. He was a big proponent of using one basin for panic attacks. So if you have a patient that is otherwise fine, normal, there's not anything that you're really concerned about, but that they say they go to like a big Home Depot or big open spaces, they have problems and they get overwhelmed easily, basin really can help. One basin is very helpful for a lot of patients. You also like to use base up for neck and back problems. He really hated progressives because in order to make progressives, I don't know if you know this, but they have to put base down in, or they induce base down. So very often, it's not just this kind of thing that people are doing when they actually are trying to look up close on the computer with their progressive, but it also has base down in it. So it actually makes it harder to converge. And then that can cause back and neck problems. So he often would use base up. He would also just do this. He called it Fortuitous fingers. This was his test to see if binasals would work. So if you do this and it feels better, then he would add binasals to it. I like it, actually. When I feel stressed, especially after looking at a screen for a while, I'll just kind of do this and it actually feels calmer. Bruce Wolfe of the Wolfe Wands said that it's really our responsibility to determine that lenses that would support and enhance or lead the individual in the direction we would like them to go. So how can we help them develop a visual process that's efficient? Dick Appel, he actually was the one that helped establish that Lens and Prism Symposium back in the 90s in New Haven at Gazelle. And he talked about really our first concern should always be near point. We should really be focusing on near point. He had a big beef with school screenings because really all they're looking at is the distance. They're not really looking at where all the learning takes place. Merrill Bowen, as I mentioned before, likes to use microprisms. He felt that that would really create a new spatial world and it really doesn't disrupt the patient. So he liked that. He also felt that when we're doing vision therapy and or utilizing lenses and prisms, we're engaging learning, and learning releases dopamine, which makes us feel good. Smith is another one that talks a bit about lenses and prisms and how it can change our perception, our function, structure, and behavior. And it's one of the fastest ways to create a change. I mean, it can be very immediate. And I'll talk about that a little bit later too. He also talked, as well as Kaplan, they talk a bit about focal and ambient prism training glasses. You'll hear that. I mean, that's central peripheral really, but there's some people prefer focal ambient, some people prefer central peripheral. I'm more on the central peripheral camp. But basically, what did all of these giants understand? I know this is like an hour's worth of the history, but I do think it's important because it's things that I think are really the basis of how and why I prescribe, but it's nothing that I learned in school. So what did all of those giants understand? That lenses and prisms can affect immediate change, that they are very powerful tools, and that it's really only optometrists that know how to use them. Occupational therapists, speech therapists, teachers do not have them at our access, and we have the training. If we understand vision development, if we understand visual function, and if we understand what and how a lens and or prism operates on an individual, then we really have the capacity to make a real positive difference in many people's lives. So, and in addition to lenses and prisms, we have many treatment options, and I often utilize these in conjunction with lenses and prisms. So we can add occluders. I mentioned the binasals. We can talk about tints, which is syntonics, and then our whole vision therapy program, whether it's rehabilitative, enhancement, however you want to look at it. I think utilizing lenses and prisms as part of our therapy is key. So it's 2:00. Why don't we take like a 2-3 minute break? We'll come back at 2:05. I'm going to wrap up and review what lenses and prisms do, and then we'll go into the examination point. All right. All right. We can start again. I'll share my screen. All right, so what do lenses and prisms do? They change the input, so we have a change in output. And as I mentioned, they have immediate and profound changes, and they can affect heart rate, breathing, posture, balance, coordination, attitude. I love this quote. It's not what a lens or prism does to the person. It is what the patient does with the lens and prism. So that's really important to remember, because you can actually have two people with the exact same findings, and one will respond positively to something you give and the other one will not. So you really have to be looking at that individual, and then what do they do with what you give them. I'm going to skip this because you guys have had enough optics. So what are the effects of minus lenses? So remember, we talked about the plus lens, and that reduces the tonicity of the postures of the postural musculature. It'll decrease heart rate. It will expand breathing. It will also expand visual space volume. It will also expand time and emphasize ground. I actually wish I could convert it. I haven't gotten around to it, but I had a little girl who I had her just try to bunt the ball. So she's here trying to bunt the ball. Every single time she missed. Put just plus 50s on her, and she hit it every time. She said, "Did I slow the ball down?" And that's exactly what a plus lens does. It gives the impression of something being slower, and you have more ground, you have better peripheral vision, you can judge depth and space better, and then it's not as intense. So certainly those patients that have TBI, I often will prescribe them plus lenses, because it just takes down that intensity. You can add a tint as well, very often in the blue realm, but plus lenses really have a lot of positive effects. So the correlate then is minus lenses. So minus lenses have the opposite effects to plus lenses. They're going to constrict light, they're going to increase light intensity, they're going to increase the tonicity, increase heart rate, they're going to shallow the breathing, they're going to constrict space, shorten time, and then have you focus in on the figure. Again, you guys know this from optics, but it's important to really recognize and understand that entire effect on the body. I'm going to skip that. Cylinder will also have some of that effect, but there's a difference between with the rule and against the rule. With rule cylinder will increase the ground, but then you'll have a general loss of awareness and a loss of general orientation, because it's going to shorten space and time. It's going to compress the figure into the ground. You'll get some, you'll have that gain in panorama, but then you don't have the up and down. It's the opposite for against the rule. And this is another one. Mark Grossman used to talk, he would just track, he'd watch you follow a target. He could tell what your cylinder was based on how you tracked. And he also talked about that, you know, if they have a cylinder along a certain axis, that they never develop. And a lot of this came from stress. I mean, Elliot Forrest's Stress and Vision book, that they never developed the eye movement skills properly. And because they didn't develop those eye movement skills, they ended up with astigmatism. So actually by doing tracking, a lot of tracking, you would actually be able to get rid of the astigmatism. And I do have a case like that I can show you. And I have plenty of cases where we just do a lot of ocular motor skills training, and then the cylinder drops. And again, that's because the individual hasn't been able to be adept in all fields of gaze. So let's talk about prescribing a little bit. So generally, plus lenses are prescribed in a compensatory manner for hyperopia or presbyopia. Therapeutically, we certainly can use them to relax accommodation if they're over accommodating. We can use them to relax convergence if they're showing convergence excess. And then we can also use them to expand the peripherally. Minus lenses, we use them in a compensatory manner for myopia and astigmatism. Therapeutically, we can use them to stimulate accommodation and stimulate convergence and increase focal attention. Let's talk a little bit more about prisms. And this is interesting too. I mean, we all know that it's going to displace the image or the object, and you'll see the image closer to the apex. The base will move it. So there's a transformation in the direction of the base, if that makes sense. What I like though is if you look at the bottom right, you can think about a plus and minus lens as having base out or base in effects. So a plus lens has more of a base in effect. It's effectively two base in lenses, and then the minus lens has the base out effect. It's effectively two base out lenses. And so we understand that base out prism is going to stimulate convergence and slightly increase accommodation. Base in prism is going to stimulate divergence and decrease accommodation. So if we go back to a summary, you've got the prism effects, but they're very similar to the plus and minus lens effects. So the base in prism, it has a plus effect. That's really the base is oriented nasally, and that's going to displace the image outward and further away, but it's going to have the reduction in tonicity that you would have with the plus lens. It's also going to expand visual space volume, relax convergence as well. It can be prescribed correctively for exotropia, but it can also be used therapeutically for esotropia if we want to try to, well, you might only start with decreasing base out, but that's a base in effect. Base out has the opposite effect, more of a minus lens type effect. So that's going to have the apices oriented nasally. It's going to increase the tonicity, reduce the space volume, stimulate convergence. Obviously, we use it correctively for esotropia, but it can be prescribed therapeutically for exotropia. Yoked prisms. Hopefully you've all heard about yoked prisms. Bruce Wolfe was the first to use 10 diopter yoked prisms. He made them up in 4 matching frames. In fact, I think that's probably the frame that he used. Base down, base up, base right, and base left. I have all of these made up in a couple of my locations, maybe not all of them, because I also just get the yoked rotating yoked prisms from Bernal. So we like to use those a lot. So let's just talk about the yoked prism effect. Again, we've got base down and base up, and the base down has that plus effect, if you will. So the base down moves things up and out. It'll expand the visual space volume, similar to a plus lens or base in lens. It will increase awareness of their general orientation. It will amplify the near space as well, which is why you'll have that feeling of walking uphill. It will relax convergence, so I tend to use them therapeutically for ESOs. They can also be used correctively for exos. And then base up has the opposite effect, similar to a minus effect, where it's going to reduce and constrict the visual space. You'll have more of the focal attention. It'll increase the convergence, and you can use them correctively for exotropia. Again, I tend to be less inclined to use base up because I don't want to embed the case. Base right and left obviously has the orientation where the base right will displace the image to the left. You can prescribe it as a compensation for right visual field loss. You can also use it therapeutically to help engage and build awareness on that left visual field. Base left does the opposite. So in a vision therapy program, well, a lot of my stroke patients that have some field loss, I will actually send them home with yoked prisms, and they have to use the base right for 10 minutes, base left for 10 minutes, and they have to go back and forth, say, an hour a day. So I can go over some of that a little bit more. I think with the other thing that is important to recognize that the yoked prisms will change your general orientation. So the different yoked prisms will actually shift where the eyes are looking. It'll also shift where the individual sees space, but it will also shift the center of gravity. So posturally, you'll have an effect based down. They might go up on their toes, which is why I tend to prescribe base down for kids that are toe walkers, because it forces them to go up further, so then they reorient and will come backwards. Base right and left will have rotational effects. So remember, if you have somebody that has a head turned slightly in one direction or the other, you can actually use base right or left prism to help orient them. Padula talks a lot about visual midline shift. So sometimes people have a midline shift after an injury, typically. So then you can use base right or left to help orient them.
Dr.
You can
Schulman,
use, yes.
This is something I was confused about with the shift of gravity forward or backward. Can you explain how base up or down shifts forward and backwards, not like up and down?
Yeah, that's probably one of the things that's the hardest to understand about prisms. So base down, we'll take base down first of all. That's going to shift everything up. So it'll actually, you'll have like a movement upwards, but then you'll have that shift. So your body's going to go like this, and it can go back on the heels, but then you would fall over. So then you're actually going to end up back on your toes. Remember, though, it can be different with different patients. So I've had some patients where I gave them the base down, and then they ended up going way far forward or way back. So it really depends on how that individual responds. So the converse would be, and it also depends on if you're seated or standing. So, for example, I had a patient that was, in a home, and he was kind of like this after a stroke. He gave him base up, and he came up. You would use base up prism when you have base up prism on, it's going to shift things down and forward. So typically the person will go forward, but then in order to counterbalance, they'll end up on their heels.
Mm-hmm. Which is why the patient from the nursing home went back and had a better posture because they were compensating.
Right. So again, it depends on how they respond, because you can use the yoke prisms to direct visual space, but you can also use it to disrupt. And, I've worked with a lot of patients with field loss, and typically you would think the one that I had yesterday, she has a left field loss. And if you gave her base left prisms, which you would, to bring that field over to the right, she did better with just the AccuVision, a tag activity. So she felt that was helpful, but then it disrupted her balance. Mm-hmm. So then balance activities and speaking, she did better with the base right. So it was just really interesting, but then she didn't see as well on the side, which makes sense. So my feeling is when I use yoked prisms, I actually like to use them in pairs. So I will do the base right and base left, and then the base up and base down, because I really want to go back to shifting the light energy coming in, so the brain actually has to pay attention and make some form of change in the body. Mm-hmm. Again, if we're looking at a compensatory way of prescribing, for the patient yesterday, Marcia, if she weren't in vision therapy, I would consider just giving her the base left prisms in her glasses. But she's coming for vision therapy, so I told her we're going to go about, I think we have like 3 or 4 weeks till her next progress evaluation. I said, let's do 3 or 4 weeks of using the yoked prisms right and left and see what we come up with. Mm-hmm. And then as far as the base down and base up, again, those I have tended to use more in the younger kids that have, I've used them a lot in the autism spectrum, but I've also used them with the kids that are just kind of all over the place. If they're like hyper and all over the place, you throw base up on, that helps to make them more focused and more attentive, and then they can stay focused. But again, I also want to give them, I'll have them maybe do 5 minutes of that, and then I'll do the 5 minutes of the base down, because I want to put the base down on them, have them go out up here and be all disorganized and see if they can regain that focus. Again, prescribed in a therapeutic manner. If I was not working with them in vision therapy, I would throw the base down on and see if they were toe walkers and they stopped toe walking. Well, okay, then I might just prescribe that. Oops. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sure. I'm just going to go a little bit more, and then if you have any questions before I get into the examination, we'll take a little moment too. So let me just summarize how I would prescribe Prisms. So certainly for strabismic conditions. So for example, if I have an exotrope and they're not coming for vision therapy, they just are struggling. So I had, I think she was like a 15 exotropia post-surgical. She had done some vision therapy, but now she's in high school and she just wanted something so that she doesn't see double when she gets tired. So she had, some decent control. So we ended up giving her, I think, 53 beats in OU for reading. And she said that was great. That's all she needed. We had an esotrope. Oh, she was a post-cataract surgery. So post-cataract surgery, now she's like 11 ESO in the distance. And, again, doesn't really want to do vision therapy. So I think we gave her 3 or 4 base out. I think it was 3 and 4 base out at distance and a driving prescription. And she was thrilled, no double vision. So certainly, you can prescribe for what they measure. I've had a couple of hyper ropes. Actually, I had another guy on Wednesday. He was a little exo, maybe 6 exo with about 5 or 6 vertical. Not a lot, but yeah, it was, 5 or 6 at distance and near. And he said that he doesn't see double that often, but he does see it daily. So we put 2 base down on one eye, 2 base up on the other. I split the difference and he loved it. I tried to give him 1 and 2 and he said, no, it's double. No, it's not double. Oh, no, it's double. So he's going back and forth. So we just gave him the split difference. Again, I could have just given 4 on the hype. It was more of a hypotropic eye, but very often I split it and that works better. Then for non-strabismic conditions, for CIs, I love base in, just a half, 1, 3/4. It actually can really make a big difference. You'll see an NPC go from 7 inches, 9 inches to 3/5 with 1 base in or half base in. Convergence excess, again, using some plus really can often help, but I'll give a half or 1 or 2. If it's a esotrope, I might even give 3 base down with their plus, and that base down helps to move the image up and out, and it really can help with the ESO. So that's kind of simply how I would prescribe for, just straight cases. If we want to look at prescribing from that behavioral standpoint, as I mentioned, I would do base in for the exotrope, base down for the esotrope, and then splitting the base up and base down in the hypertropes. And then we can also use base out to stimulate convergence in an exo, but again, I would only do that in vision therapy, not in a prescription. And ESOs, that you can give them base in or effectively reduce the base out to help straighten their eyes. So before we go over the examination, are there any other questions? I know I talk fast and I try to cover a lot, but I think you guys can handle it, right? So no questions? All right, I'll keep going. So primary care exam, that's your basics: eye health, confrontation fields, ocular motilities, distance and near acuities, refraction. And I always do a binocular balance. I think that's really important. I think too few people do that. And if you do the binocular balance, that's what the patient's most comfortable with. Then you've got what we call our sensory motor examination. So if we want to do a much more involved examination, then we're going to really look at those fixation pursuits and saccades in more detail. We're going to take the time. It's not just going to be the physiological H. We're going to be really looking at the quality and symmetry. And if there's any compensatory movements like head or jaw movements, say on pursuits or saccades, or body movements even, because remember, we're looking at it more from that developmental standpoint. We'll also be looking at a number of areas of their capacity to focus. So accommodative skills, as I mentioned, I always do near ret. You saw in all of the cases that I do plus and minus 2 flippers. I'll do a fused cross cylinder, accommodative amps, negative and positive relative accommodative tests. And then for the binocular skills, you saw we do cover test, NPC, stereo. I like doing a prism flipper test, which is 12 base out, 4 base in. I'll look at phorias at distance and near, and then ranges, base out and base in, distance and near. And then I do the OEP models where we'll do the positive relative accommodation first, and also the base out findings first, followed by the base in findings. Then, of course, you can do a visual perceptual or visual processing evaluation. And I think that's really important. I don't do it on everybody, but certainly if you're going to be exploring lenses and prisms and maybe you're not quite sure what's going to have the best performance or best effect for the patient, then do observations of reading or Marsden Ball or just walking. Very often I'll have them just walk and then sit and then walk and sit or toss a beanbag back and forth to them just by actually observing performance, how they're moving, how they're engaging. Sometimes I'll just repeat the stereo test and you'll see a huge improvement just from lenses and prisms. Actually, on Wednesday, we had, I think, a 12-year-old girl. Dad said she's on her cell phone all the time. She was complaining that her eyes were tired and bothering her. I mean, we certainly talked about visual hygiene and taking a rest. But what was really unusual is I've been seeing her for years, and but it had been like 3 or 4 years. So the pre-tester did color vision testing as if she was a new patient, because we don't do it all the time. But she only got 3 out of 8 out of each eye for the color vision. And we looked back and she had gotten all 8 on each eye like 3 or 4 years ago. So I did my evaluation and she was very much like that stress case, just really just her whole system was stressed. She was going into ESO, over convergence, and then very reduced accommodation. So I took out my pair of 0.37 half in. Oh, she also was only showing about 20/40 acuity. Put the 0.37 half in on her, and now she could see 20/20 distance and near, and she got 5 out of 8 on the color vision test. So it's a little unusual that it was still reduced, but I said, well, come back in 3 months and let's recheck it then. I mean, sometimes you can have reduced color vision for other reasons or nutritional problems, but I mean, the fact that it went from 3 out of 8 to 5 out of 8 with just glasses, I said, all right, let's see what happens. So it's important to repeat some of the testing that you do with what I call a probe lens. So I have a lot of different prescriptions made up, like +1 and +50, half down, and whatever. There's a whole list of things that I like to keep. I'll try them on, but you can also, of course, just trial frame it and then repeat the NPC or repeat the cover test or, as I said, the stereo, or just watch them do a task with and without the glasses. Of course, you can also do more standardized tests like a DEM or a Visograph. Also, that's a study that we never got to. I gotta dig that one up, but Visograph testing with and without, say +50. You can see them go up to grade levels just with the lenses, or if you want to do a gray oral. And then, of course, course, all the standardized tests, I think those are important to do and they have their use. Those tests I wouldn't recommend doing with and without glasses. You're going to make your decision and then go from there. Kraskin talked about the optometric examination, how important it was to do Skeffington OEP21 point, and then doing the visual performance test, as I mentioned. He also did like to do a Keystone visual skills test, and then stress point retinoscopy. I tend to do Bell, but just because it's easy and fast, and I don't like fussing with the MEM cards to stick on my retinoscope. So I will just do Bell, but you can do, I probably do a modified stress point with the Bell. So you can actually look at when they have that stress point. I don't have time to go over all of the details with near retinoscopy, but if you haven't really studied it, it's definitely worth taking a look at the different types of near retinoscopy, Bell, Book, MEM, and stress point. The key really with all of the retinoscopies at near is just to make observations. Notice what's the quality of the reflex, when does it engage, when does it disengage, when does it go dull. So you're looking at those brightness and reflex changes, it'll tell you what the stress level of that individual is. You can actually tell if they're in fight or flight or if they're tuned out and avoiding. You want to prescribe the plus lens, typically, that gives you the brightest and most engaged retinoscopic reflex at near that's within a normal range. So you want them to fixate as far away clearly and comfortably with a plus lens. So again, very often I'll do near retinoscopy without, with, that might be one of the key tests that I do. So I have patients come back maybe 6 months later or 3 months, maybe I just give them a plus 50 lens, I have them come back and then I'll repeat all of the testing, and maybe it's the same. I had one this week, actually, pretty much all the tests were the same. Still a little bit reduced in the ranges and recoveries, but when I tested near ret with the glasses on, he did phenomenally better than without. And this was a little guy, gosh, I forgot what, he had some weird genetic disorder. I'm going to forget what it was because I'd never heard of it before. So nonverbal, not really engaging. It was hard to get a whole lot of testing on him, even doing the ranges and recoveries. It was prism bar and just objective only, no subjective response. But I had prescribed plus 51 base in because he was a little exo, say 6 months ago. And then with that plus 51 in, bam, you could see him engaged on the target, like around 14 inches. And then without his glasses on, it was with motion the entire time. So I really do like using my near ret. And I use a spot scope. I think the spot scope is much better than the streak. It's just fast, easy. You can just see everything all at once. All right. So I like this slide because, you know, it's like the alphabet soup of all the diagnoses that you can come up with, which you do have to come up with if you want to get paid by insurance companies. But basically, we're really not making a diagnosis per se. We're really looking at that individual and determining, okay, what are their needs and how can we help them? And again, we can use lenses and prisms at any and all ages and stages. So if we think about that OEP model, and we think about the fact that vision develops over time and is susceptible to stress and environment, and there's, you know, all those factors at play, including genetics, including physiology. I like to think of it from, I talk about it as a mental, emotional, physiological, biochemical model where you're really looking at all of these different stresses and demands on the individual, plus what their thought patterns are, what their nutrition is like, what their biochemistry, whether they're in that fight or flight or more in a parasympathetic state, and then looking at what their genetics or epigenetics are, you can come up with a reasonable idea of where they are at any given point and what the best recommendations are and what lens or prism might be the most useful for that individual. The OEP models basically says that anyone that does not have 6 exophoria at near, and I understand now they really say the norm is 4 exophoria at near, but the OEP, the original OEP model, going back to Skeffington, said that if you do not have 6 exophoria at near, then you are under near point stress. So if you have somebody that has 1 exophoria at near, they're exhibiting some form of near point stress. And that you don't really look at the phoria compared to the vergence findings. You're not really thinking of it from that mechanistic model. You're really looking at the vergence measures as an assessment of their overall quality in binocular function. So typically we think of, Percival's or Sheard's criterion that you have to look at, okay, this is the phoria, can they compensate it? OEP says, nah, it's not really, that mechanistic. It's not like, oh, if you have this much, then you can handle that much. You really need to look at that overall pattern because it's telling you where that individual's going and what you can do to help them. So looking at what their distance findings are, what their near findings are, but you're getting a sense based on their phoria, based on their ranges and recoveries, how much space they can handle. So for example, I had a patient this week too, where her ranges and recoveries were 4-1, 4-1, distance base out and base in. And then I think it was 10-4, 12-4, base out, base in at near. So that's somebody that just has really poor spatial awareness. She's probably got, and in fact, we did what we call a functional color visual field, which you do when you do syntonics, and it was really constricted. So really stressed, really not handling space well. Didn't really matter what her phoria was. We know that that individual is really struggling to localize in space, and that her overall processing is a challenge. And if she were ESO, you would say, oh, then she's, just centrally focused. If she's EXO, then she's, more peripherally focused. So we're really looking at all of these findings as a whole, not at any one specific finding that's going to determine and tell us, what to prescribe. So in terms of thinking about prescribing, I really like this slide by Kraskin. It talks about, does the individual have a vision problem? What are his needs? Will an optometric program of care satisfy his needs? And if so, what program of care is appropriate? That's really what we're doing with every patient. We're trying to assess if there's a visual problem. Does the demands on that individual, so for example, is the kid in a Montessori school and they don't have to read a lot, or are they in high pressure, Manhattan school and they have to, keep up with a very rigorous program. So we look at those needs and then can we do something that will help that individual? And if we can, what are we going to choose? So a visual problem is really an unsatisfied vision-related need. And it relates specifically to what we're finding in that individual. And obviously there's patients that are oblivious, they don't have any complaints. So we're always going to be looking at what that complaint is. But we also want to look at that person because I'm sure you've already seen patients where you ask them if they have any problems. No, nothing, no visual problems. You do the exam and they're a mess. And then you ask, well, how are you doing in school? Oh, well, it gets reading help and gets math help and gets da-da-da. So they're not relating that vision is a contributing factor to, say, their learning problems. Or even adults that, might be struggling at work, or, they get tired or they fall asleep reading. They might not say that that's a complaint of theirs, but it's obviously something that we can observe as a problem based on, say, a reduced NPC or poor saccadic eye movements. So we really want to be looking at our measures, but really looking at it from that person standpoint. And we have to ask the right questions. We have to ask and anticipate what some of those symptoms might be that they might not even be reporting on based on what we're measuring, if that makes sense. So what we're measuring is, I don't know, this is very wordy, but I'll just say that, there's so many things that we can find, and we have to look at and relate what we're finding to what the deviation is and how it's impacting and creating a dysfunction or disability in that individual. So what are the visual needs? Again, sometimes patients aren't aware of it, but ultimately we want to satisfy their needs. And part of that is really listening to them. So that's why I have this lovely slide with the huge ears. We really need to listen and kind of listen between the lines to what the patient is saying. So again, oftentimes they're just not able to explain what's going on, or they're not capable of recognizing the link between visual skills and learning, or visual skills and functioning in their environment. So a lot of that requires listening and then education on our part. So some of the things that we want to share with them, that when we address a visual problem, that we can actually improve reading, that they won't lose their place, that their posture can be better, and they can feel more comfortable when they're doing a near task, that we can prevent problems from occurring by addressing things early. Even watery, itchy, or tired eyes. Oftentimes it's not just dry eye. It actually could be related to functional problems. And then patients that have to reread or can't process information or can't concentrate. And that's a huge problem now. So many of the kids and teens I see, part of it, I've seen it with my own kids, where, they're trying to study, but then they're also on Insta and then watching a movie at the same time. So there is that. But you also want to be looking at, okay, how can we help their ability to concentrate? Again, treatment options. We've talked about developmental, stress relieving, and then therapeutic glasses. So you can actually prescribe where you want them to go. So a lot of times I might prescribe the optimal lens that I'd like them to be in. That might not be where they are now. So again, I just got an email today from a parent saying, they're happy about doing the vision therapy. They think the first session was amazing and they're really excited about it. It's an isotrope +5 that was recommended for surgery. They don't want to do surgery, so they wanted to try vision therapy. So I suggested, okay, you have the +5, but it was +5 with, I think, a plus 150 add. And I was actually, I refracted him to +350. So that's a kid that's really overplussed, and I'm going to be working with him in vision therapy. That there's like no accommodative engagement, and he's now overplus. So that's actually going to make my job in vision therapy harder. So I suggested that she get a therapy pair of glasses that he would use for vision therapy. And I wanted him to wear them an hour or two a day. And I think we prescribed like +3 or +350 with one base down. So again, help to move that eye out and up and out. I don't remember exactly what the, let's say it was between 20 and 30, the esotropia. I just don't remember the amount. But anyway, that's just a therapy prescription. He's just going to use them for some of the time for the vision therapy room. And then invariably, I think I can't even remember a time where it didn't happen, that the patient ends up preferring the therapy prescription. So they end up with the +350s and stop wearing the +5 with the 150 add. So, that's how I'm thinking, is how can I help this system develop the way I want it to go? How can I take some stress off it? Or how can I guide them to where I want them to end up? And obviously, we oftentimes will recommend vision therapy. There's often going to be visual modifications. I remember a kid that she literally would read like this in the dark. she's probably 5th grade, and her myopia was increasing like a diopter half every 6 months. And the mother was like, well, what are we going to do? And I'm like, well, we need to modify that posture. We need to, practice proper hygiene, good posture, good lighting, make sure she's eating well, getting outside and exercising. She refused to go outside, refused to move. So, again, that's going to impact the success of any given therapeutic prescription. So in terms of the treatment options, I'm going to cover a bit more. I'll just keep going another 20 minutes, say, and then we'll take another quick break. I'm a fan of taking quick breaks. But treatment options. So the prescription, remember that judicial use of lenses that Gus Forkiotis talked about? We want to really find the optimal prescription that will correct that near point problem. And it has nothing to do with neutralizing a refractive error. So very often I might find a patient that's like -50, -75, but I know that the majority of the problem is at near. They didn't even come in complaining about distance vision. I'm not going to prescribe that refractive error. I'm more likely going to prescribe a +50 lens or a +1/4 lens for near to help with that drive to converge closer than the target. So our goal really is to improve performance, reduce any vision disorder, and reduce whatever prescription or refractive error they're coming in with. And as I said, that might include some vision therapy. I'm also a big fan of doing what I call chairside vision therapy. So I will send them home with near-far charts, heart chart, or a set of flippers and say, I want you to do some of this. I'll send them home with, we have these little cards that are made up that talk about proper visual hygiene and good lifestyle recommendations for healthy vision. So I'll say, these are the things that you need to do. And then come back in 6 weeks or 3 months and see if that's made an improvement. So we can prescribe less than what we're measuring. All right, so now I'm going to cover just some general recommendations in terms of prescribing. Again, these are some things that I've learned through the years and I subscribe to, so I'm going to just share them with you. So I learned this actually while I was a student. I did a rotation down in Baltimore, actually at an Omni Center, but then they let us out at 1 o'clock on Wednesdays. So I went to Paul Harris's office from 2 to 8. And I learned a lot from him in terms of prescribing. And I'll talk about him a little bit more, but he said that you could really give a plus to everyone. And then he modified that. He said, well, not everybody, but you can give a plus for almost all of your patients. He said beginning myopes, astigmatics, anisometropes, anybody with reduced ranges and recoveries at near, accommodative insufficiency, convergence insufficiency. And there's another little side note. Why would plus help a CI? Anybody have the answer to that? And take a drink.
If they're an adapted CI, so they really have, the problem is an accommodative issue.
That is a good reason. Yep, that is one for sure. How about somebody that's not an accommodative CI, that remains a CI? Why would plus help?
To reduce the stimulus to accommodate for near.
Exactly. And then when you reduce the stimulus for accommodation, what happens? You relax the accommodation, but then you actually have to converge to be able to see the target. That was a question that Carl Gruning asked me when I was in 3rd year at 8 a.m. And it was like, he's like, Randy, what's the answer? And I was like, oh, it's like, you better have it next week, because he was my eye doctor and my professor. So he loved to pick on me, and I will never forget the answer to that question. but that's exactly what he said. It could be they were over converging because they were well, actually Gus talked a lot about the fact that every CE is really a well compensated CI. But that the fact that accommodation and convergence are linked, so, an effect of a plus lens would be to relax the accommodation, but then now they can converge. So yeah, thanks for engaging. As I mentioned, reduced stereo. We talked about reduced color vision. Near retinoscopy will show that plus can be helpful. Anybody that has any kind of symptoms of headaches, blur, fatigue, asthenopia at near, and again, we're seeing so much of that lately. You put a little bit of plus on and it's like, they just feel so much better. Distance blur after near work. So that's a really good question to ask your patients. When they say, oh, things are blurry, ask, are they as blurry on your ride into work as opposed to your ride home? A little different now because nobody's driving into work anymore, but you can still ask, do you notice that things are blurry far away after you've done near work? And there's been studies that actually show that when you have a fixed distance at near, it can actually affect your distance. So you can talk to them as well about just, making sure you're looking near and far. If they lose their place when reading. So again, that could be an oculomotor or saccadic problem, but when you use a plus lens, it actually expands the print, so it makes it actually easier to see. It improves your peripheral vision, and very often kids that have trouble reading, they tend to read, they sound it out and they read letter by letter. They're not taking it in as a whole chunk, and some of that is because they literally are reading like this, and they're in a tunnel vision effect. When you give them the plus, it's like they can see the next word. And they've also shown that readers that actually can see 2 to 3 letters ahead, you can look at some of the visograph findings or readalizer findings, and you'll see that. But those that can read a couple of words ahead actually are more fluent readers. So when you give them the plus 50, the fluency improves. Sensitive eyes, just in general. So I've had a number of myopes. I know this sounds weird too, but 40-year-old myopes that are just starting to be a little bit presbyopic, say they're -4, but they're also, female and complaining about dry eye. I find, all right, maybe a little bit over minus. I have them just try, say, -375 or 350. They come back and they say their dry eye went away. So again, if you're over minus, you tend to work harder, you tend to stare more, and then the eyes feel drier. So if you actually drop the minus a little bit, they actually are more comfortable and their eyes don't burn as much. And then those that get really close, you give them some plus and they have a much better working distance. So, I mean, those are a lot of cases that we see routinely, and just taking away a little minus or adding some plus makes a big, big difference. And, I can't tell you how many people come in over minus. They're just, I had another one. She came in because she's now esotropic at 42. So she had been wearing -2, no, she had been wearing -2 sphere lenses. And then, over the last year and a half or 2 years, she had gone up to -250. But then she was having some problems at near. So somebody fit her in a low ad multifocal lens, contact lens. But they gave her a -3 to help with the distance, because now, the distance was impacted by adding the plus. So now she's in the -3 with the low ad, and she started troping. So I said, why don't you try going back to the -2s? I gave her a bunch of -275s, a bunch of -250s, and then said, just work your way down and see how you do. The -250 sphere, she was fine. She could see 20/20 at distance and near. So she's going to work her way down and go back to the -2 and see if her eye straightens. I mean, it was pretty significant. That left eye went in like, I think 30 degrees. And just by adding +50, it straightened out. So, I mean, it was just kind of an interesting case, but every case is interesting and all these things happen. So just in terms of prescribing, you want to compensate for any visual dysfunction, improve performance, reduce symptoms, and you're not really going to be giving the exact prescription that you measure. Very often you're not going to be giving that full myopic prescription. You'll be making adjustments. You'll give them less than the subjective refraction. You might undercompensate. And then with SIL, I tend to go closer to 90 or 180. So I'm going to talk about, again, some more prescribing philosophies over the next couple of slides. So we'll talk about myopia control. Some people talk about the low ad versus high ad. That's where I have some like a pet peeve with a lot of these myopia control studies. A lot of some of the newer ones are a little bit better, but a number of years ago, they just randomly gave +150 or +2 to every myope and said, well, the bifocal didn't help so much. My feeling is you really have to look at what their accommodative system is. So some people will do well with a +1 ad, some will do better with a +50 ad, some will do well with a 150. But going with the 150 or the 2 ad actually is often too high when you're trying to address myopia control. Very often the seg height is way too low, so they're really not utilizing it. So set the seg height 1 millimeter above that lower lid margin, or bisect the lower iris, and you'll get a little bit more myopic control over that. And we talked about that last case too, where you have to look at what the near work intensity, what the personality is, and make sure that you're addressing some of those lifestyle considerations. I do like flat tops or flat top 28. I don't love using progressives for kids for myopia control because of all the distortion, the peripheral distortion, as well as that base down. I will consider using progressives in a myope that is also very highly ESO, because then they're getting that base down effect and it helps. So that's one of the times I will use progressives. Arnie Schulman, I really liked his philosophy on myopia control. He just wouldn't give a distance vision RX at all. He basically said that that's disruptive to central periphery in a developing case, and he basically would just give the NVRX. So they might be a -2, and he'll just give them +50, and then talk about doing vision therapy and nutrition and exercise. Again, it's a nice philosophy, and I do incorporate that. And I very often do not prescribe unless they're symptomatic. For me, 20/30 is fine. But I'm going to go over this case because this is a very typical minus lens case. So a 15-year-old complaining of distance vision blur, and monocularly it's pretty blurry. Binocularly she's still getting 20/25, and she's really only taking about a -1/4. Amps were decent, NRAP a little reduced, stereo good, and then generally reduced ranges and recoveries at distance, a little better at near. So what did we do? Oh, here's her VioStar and Cairo look really pretty good, and that's pretty good, but she didn't do well on the usable vision. So distance acuity is poor, and then she's showing a little bit of the exo. I decided not to do any RX at that time and just do a handful of vision therapy sessions, really to build that home program. She really only did 1 session and then did some home therapy, which included flippers and the near far heart chart, like I mentioned. Not a whole lot changed. Still reduced acuity, but then when I showed her the minus, she didn't really like it as much, and she just stuck with plano. Everything else was pretty similar, maybe a little better ranges on the base out at distance. still decided let's hold off on glasses. I think she came back another 6 months later or a year later. Now she needs to pass her driver's test. But everything's pretty stable. She is showing that minus 50. And she was showing some exo. Although the ranges and recoveries looked really good. So she's showing a little exo there too. And the usable vision's pretty bad. So I said, okay, just use a distance driving prescription. And that's what I gave her. I told her to continue with her home program. And so that was when she had just turned 16. She is now 21. And she just keeps these in the glove compartment for the most part. I should have included, I think. Well, did I include it? No. I just saw her this summer, and she said she barely uses them, and she's almost 20/20 at distance. So she doesn't do much of her therapy, but she says every so often she picks up the flippers and does them. So to me, that's a success. That's somebody that certainly if she went to another doctor who might have had some pressure to prescribe glasses, she would have gotten minus lenses, years before. So, and I had been seeing her since probably she was 12. So, we were able to keep her prescription very low. And I can't tell you how many prescriptions were averted, if you will. So I've had a number of myopes just never need the glasses, or just need, something really minimal and never increase, which is unusual because usually, myopes just keep increasing. But I'd say, while I have some myopes in the practice, it's definitely much lower than I would say an average practice. Oh, I wanted to talk to you about Steve Gallup. Remember I mentioned that he talked about astigmatism. Is everybody good? Do you want me to just keep going? Or does anybody need a break? All right, let's do our 2 or 3 minute break. It's 3:02 and we'll just come back at 3:05. And that's when I'll cover the astigmatism. I know that's a ton of information. Only have 60 more slides. We'll get there. All right, so welcome back. As I said, we'll keep going and then try to stop for any questions in about another half hour. All right, so astigmatism. So Steve Gallup is a character. If you ever get a chance to listen to him speak, it's usually entertaining. But he basically says almost everyone has some, like get over it. We do not need to prescribe for it. He said most people are asymptomatic, and certainly chasing that quarter still when you're doing a refraction can drive you nuts. And for the most part, well, as Camille knows, I'm not going to prescribe it anyway, so don't bother searching for it when they're 20, 15. It's a normal variant, and there's some benefit. If you think about it, if you have 2 focal points, you actually can get things clear at near or at different distances. And that just because you have a slight decrease in acuity does not mean that you should prescribe cylinder. He likes to say that it's overrated and overprescribed. Really what you want to give them is a prescription that will eliminate stress. And he believes that astigmatism is a sign of visual stress. Astigmatism is not the problem. It is an indicator of the individual's attempt to solve a problem. And actually by treating SIL, you're actually making it more difficult to treat them in vision therapy. And I would say I agree on a lot of this. I'm going to go over that case that I was telling you about, the cylinder case. So this was a 5-year-old coming in wearing SIL. So combination plus 175 minus 275 in the right and plus 2 and minus 250 in the left. Not great acuity anyway, although uncorrected, it was much worse. The big one is even in a 5-year-old, head movements of 4 on a scale from 1 to 4 is pretty significant. I found a little less SIL in the right eye, but she pretty much took that close to that same prescription, maybe a little less plus. Again, stereo is reduced, amps are reduced, ranges and recoveries were a little reduced, particularly at distance. Usable vision was reduced. And I mean, that's really actually pretty good for a 5-year-old, but still a little disorganized. So we kept her, actually the first slide should have said no, didn't have the base in. I added the base in. And I just gave her eye movement activities. Again, came from a further distance, about an hour away. So I just said, come in once a month for 6 months and we'll just give you home activities. And that's what she did. She came back in, still showing that SIL, and ranges and recoveries are a lot better. Stereo is a lot better. Eye movements, just some slight head movement. So the general skills look a lot better. And that's a big difference on the VO star and tracing. That looks a lot better, a lot more organized. I think we kept her in that prescription. Actually, I think I might have reduced it at that point, kept it going. Now she is showing a lot less SIL. So she's down to +1 -125 on subjective and +1 -150 on the left eye. Still only a little slight head movement. Decent stereo, much better ranges and recoveries across the board. So, and then even uncorrected VAs are a lot better. Look at that, even 20/20 uncorrected. Still the usable vision is not great, but everything else is coming into line. I'm not sure why that wasn't quite as good, but again, for a 6-year-old, not bad. So now we dropped the SIL. So she's down to almost less than half of the SIL that she was in before. And then she was going to continue monthly in office. I don't think she did at that point. They just did it. Oops, I didn't add it. I think for a longer talk, I added it, but so that was 5 years ago, and I've been seeing her pretty much regularly every 6 months since then. And she too was in not that long ago. I think I saw her over the summer, plano, and she's been plano for a couple of years now, actually. So pretty much 2020 without any correction. All of her skills are amazing. And I think, what is she? So that she was 5 back then. So she's, 11. I thought she was 11 or 12. So pretty much all of that went away. And you could see maybe 3 years ago, it dropped down to 75 SIL. And then she was about a quarter to a half in one eye, quarter in the other eye about a year ago. And then, about 2 years ago, in the last couple of years, nothing. A couple of more tips from Steve Gallup that I like. You're going to be prescribing for the person, not for what you're measuring. Start at work and near and work from there. Always prescribe for comfort, performance, and development. Again, these are all themes, and he studied some of those giants as well. The primary purpose of the visual process is to direct action. Again, that's a summary of Kraskin's philosophy. And that vision is pervasive in human behavior. We're using vision for everything. He also talked a lot about there's really never one prescription that's going to be perfect for everything. So he said that there's typically a range of lenses that would work depending on what the task is, what the distance is. And generally speaking, most prescriptions are stronger than necessary for their proposed use, and they're inappropriate for the majority of activities of which they are given. And I see that all the time. I mentioned the 42-year-old woman, but I can't tell you how many kids are prescribed really over-minused or given prescriptions that are really not necessary for their age or their demands. He jokes that presbyopia begins around age 12, and we know that if you look at Donder's table, it starts to decrease our accommodative amplitude at around 12. So when we think about that, it's a spectrum. We really need to be looking at what the findings are in that individual, what the demands are, and what their needs are. He basically says avoid SIL whenever possible. One prescription is almost never good for all tasks. Avoid prescribing one prescription unless it's therapeutic, and balance lenses whenever possible. And then try to use the lowest power, start at near, pretty much all similar. Kurt Bastrom talks a lot about vestibular cases, and he talks about giving the lens that will actually stabilize the VOR gain. So you can give low plus or cut minus, and that'll actually help with gaze stabilization in TBI patients, and also in cortically visually impaired. It'll help with postural problems and stress as well. Len Press talks about giving them a choice. You can tell them they can do nothing, and then these are some of the things that you can expect if they do nothing. You can tell them to get glasses, or you can tell them to get glasses and do vision therapy. And that when we use glasses for learning purposes, it can improve attention, concentration, fluency. Prisms are individualized. Some changes occur rapidly, others take months. And I think that's an important distinction to realize. So when we're prescribing therapeutically, very often you don't get an immediate effect. So that's why I mentioned I'll have patients come back 3 months, 6 months. You want to be watching them, because you can actually have the most therapeutic effect at that 3-month mark, or maybe a year later. And then you can actually start bring it off, or reducing the prescription, or telling them not to use them as much. So you want to really pay attention to, what's the maximum beneficial effect that we can get. It's not a panacea, but Prisms can really have a big impact. Oh, and the other thing that he says is you want to make sure that you're collaborating, and I do that often. I'll work with OTs and PTs and speech therapists and reading specialists and educators, teachers. You want to get some feedback, because very often they're the ones that can actually report on big changes. That might say, oh, wow, tension is so much better, or reading's more fluent when they wear the glasses, or they make better eye contact when they have the glasses on. So, again, be in contact with them. As I mentioned, I spent a lot of time with Paul Harris as a student and beyond. Again, he's the one that said give plus to almost everyone, and then give different prescriptions for different tasks. I noticed that sometimes people feel a little hesitant about giving multiple prescriptions. Oh, well, you don't want a patient to have to spend money on this or that. To me, you're taking their choice away if you don't offer a different prescription for different tasks, because we understand that one prescription is not going to be great for everything. I mean, if they're going to be on the computer for hours a day, they shouldn't be in the minus. Even if their accommodation's wonderful and they're in their 20s, why would you have somebody that's on a computer 8 to 10 hours wearing their -3 lenses? Give them a 250, or give them something that will give them a good acuity, but also good comfort. Paul Harris also did some studies with posture and astigmatism. So he found musicians that have unusual postures tend to have unusual cylinder. So wherever possible, try to go to axis 90 or 180, or drop the cylinder. So basic summary on all these things, which should be apparent by now. Give plus to almost everyone, give different prescriptions for different tasks, balance prescriptions, give maximum plus for best acuity, decrease or drop SIL whenever possible, or give the spherical equivalent, prescribe cylinder axes closest to axis 90 and 180, be liberal with low base in Prism, and prescribe vision therapy. Give them the choices, and then vision therapy. So let's just cover the vision therapy side of it. We have a little time, perfect. So vision therapy, individualized program to help guide in the development, improve problems, remediate a problem, and then enhance skills. So Streff talked about vision therapy using many different training techniques, but the key is using those procedures to emphasize specific visual skills and help communicate what's going on and what the visual system of that individual is able to do and what it isn't able to do, and to help them get to a place where it's effortless so that it's smooth and spontaneous. And that what we're doing is providing the opportunity for the patient to actually have experiences where they can improve their awareness, improve or derive meaning from their environment, and direct their action. So we want to think about the therapy room not as you do X, Y, and Z, but we're actually teaching them how to problem solve. I should mention Al Shankman too, who I did vision therapy with in my 20s. And he said that really what we're doing in vision therapy is teaching them how to learn, so that they actually start to explore and start to understand and make connections to what they're seeing, how they're seeing, and how they can be more efficient. Because lenses and prisms are the most direct, proficient, and effective tools for producing a change in vision and subsequent action, we want to make sure that the majority of vision therapy procedures actually employ and utilize lenses and prisms. And it would be hard to imagine effective vision therapy without lens use. And I agree. As I mentioned, Gus Forkiotis worked in vision therapy with me a little bit as part of a study group. He felt that Prisms specifically would allow for the most change, and we can utilize vision and motor skills with Prisms to have a more effective learning environment. He did a lot with space and time, so metronome and movement, and again, learning how to see. He always had you wear the Prisms, do an activity, then remove the Prisms and do an activity, and then notice what changed. So a lot of times I've seen people will just, throw on glasses, do the activity, do the procedure. Okay, throw on the next pair of glasses, do the activity or procedure, or not even use lenses or prisms, even flippers. It's not just put on the flippers and then flip. You can put them on, take them off, then flip, and notice what the changes are. So you want to ask about, do they notice a change in how they're seeing? Do they notice a change in how their eyes are working together? Do they notice a change in spatial judgments or timing or eye-hand-body coordination? So I'm going to just cover a few vision therapy procedures and how you can incorporate lenses and prisms in there. So even fixations, pursuits, or saccades, doing pointer straw, four corner, or mazes, word searches, you can actually have them wearing plus and minus glasses. I've also done, I have glasses that are plus 50 on one side, minus 50 on the other, and you can put a patch on, and so they can actually be alternately stimulating and relaxing accommodation, right eye, left eye. You can actually have them use lollipop prism or prism glasses while doing pointer and straw, so that now they actually have to localize, but then they have to be able to recognize what's changed when you put on, say, 3 base right or 3 base left. Doing a Marsden ball, just looking at the Marsden ball, or doing an activity where they have to track the Marsden ball, and then can they track it when you add prism? Again, just a couple of little things. Obviously, you can do flippers with mazes and word searches and puzzles. In the therapy room, when we think about working with accommodation, we often do mental minus and then trombone it closer and further. We often use flippers or loose lenses, which is great. As I mentioned, I like to use aniso and or just throwing on high-powered plus. So I might have them try to do a puzzle with plus 5s. Or we might, somebody that I want to stimulate accommodation, I might have them do play a game while wearing -2s. So, again, don't be afraid to just throw glasses on and see how they do. When we're working in the binocular arena, dissociated prisms are great. So that's a really wonderful anti-suppression activity when you have, say, 6 up and 6 down, because now they actually have to, it's an MFBF. They have to, look with one target. Say you're doing the ball and the string, and now they have to see the 2 balls, and they might have to touch the ball that's above, the ball that's below. Squintel's another activity where it's a dissociated activity where you're using a high base in. But that's one of the best ways to actually start working on a biocular basis by using the dissociated. So you can have them take dowel sticks, and they have to try to get the dowel sticks to touch. So if they're doing this, they're now going to see 2 sets of dowel sticks, and can they keep them and see them? Can they take their water bottle and be able to grab the top hand to the top bottle, and then bottom hand to the top bottle? So really great to explore with that. And then base out and base in flippers. I know people typically just use lens flippers, but I think using the prism flippers are really great too. And prism bars. So you can do a vectogram and add prism bars too. So you're doing a monocular activity, or you've got the monocular engagement. Say if they have an eye turn or an esotropia, you might just use the prism bar and then decrease the prism bar on a static vectogram. As I mentioned, prism flippers and yoked prisms. I love using yoked prisms, and I might just do, as I said, the base right and left, and then base up and down, but always remember to give the break in between. So we might do a beanbag toss or a walk and sit. As I mentioned, I had her do the AccuVision with the base right and left. You can have them do flashlight tag games using yoked prisms. And I just find that vision therapy is much more effective. You can do a lot more exploration, but you have to ask good questions. You have to ask what they're seeing, how they're feeling, what are they noticing, how much of the room are they aware of. I talked about the dissociated prisms using dowels. And then perceptual activities too. You can get a whole array of plus and minus lenses, and then they have to actually put them in order and you want to see how they process. Do they do it based on size? When they have to hold up a lens, see what it does, and see if they can put them in size order. It's much more helpful when you get different size lens blanks, so that they can't go just by looking at the edge and seeing how thick it is, but they actually have to really look at the lens, and they have to see what it does, and then notice and feel whether it's increasing their demand, or they have to focus harder with one or the other, and then you have them line them up. You can do the same thing with loose prisms, although you want to try to find different sizes and types. Sometimes you can get the circle prisms and otherwise the wedge prisms, and then see if they can line them up in size order or change, or just not even give them a instruction. Let them have to come up with and explain why and how they came up with that sequence. And then yoked prisms, what do you notice? Just put them on. Just look around the room. Does it change the room? Does it make it look bigger, smaller? Does the floor come up? Oh, does it shift? Does the door jamb seem to be curved one way or the other? Again, people are so product oriented. We tend to, in therapy, want to do a procedure, make sure they got it, and go on to the next procedure. I worked in a therapy room where it was, I think, a 45-minute session, maybe oftentimes an hour session, where there was no procedures per se. It was, the entire session was, put these glasses on, notice what you see. And then you kind of let the patient figure out what they want to do. What do you want to play with? Okay, we'll play with that. All right, take them off. Now what do you notice? How do you feel? all right, let's try on another pair. So we might have 5, 6, 7 different pairs on in any given session. And that was the therapy. It was to actually really be aware of and tune into what their visual experience was. All right, so I'm just going to run through a couple of things. Who needs lenses and prisms? I mean, pretty much everyone. Certainly, I prescribe for babies, the school-age kids, which are the developmental or stress relieving, computer users. We're seeing so much of that now. TBI patients, again, very often having separate prescriptions is really important for their distance and near needs, but a lot of them are really struggling, so low plus can really help, just even calming that whole nervous system down. Spectrum and ADHD or developmentally delayed, there's a lot of changes that you can see there, and at any age, truly. Asked Rebecca about that one. Athletes. So a lot of times just, so I had baseball player and he was 20/20, but you know, a high level baseball player should be 20/10. And he had about 3/4 to a diopter of SIL. So fitting him with toric lenses made the difference in his game. As I mentioned, the psychological, the panic disorder, base in often helps. And obviously, you know, we all see myopes, presbyopes, hyperopes, amblyopes, and strabismics often have refractive errors too, and needs that we can help. I'm going to skip these because you basically get it. I think if you don't know this stuff by now, that there could be learning problems, stress and fatigue on the computer, the TBI, that have all sorts of problems. Sports vision, the reaction speed, again, it's going to be declined if they don't have super acuity. I'm just going to go over a strabismic case. Again, we have another +5 here, but subjectively like the +250. Good stereo though, and decent ranges. So, but a 12/8, I don't know if you saw it, was 12 alternating esotropia, and the typical strabismic VO star. I ended up just giving her that therapy prescription of +2, 1 base down. Even though she came in with the +5, she did do vision therapy, and she still showed the +5 on the auto, but the 12 alternating ET was gone. It was just a 12 esophoria distance, 6 esophoria near, but it was very intermittent, the alternating ET. I should have put an eye there. Good ranges and recoveries, and subjectively now taking the 2 instead of the 250. Still a strabismic, but you got a little bit of separation there. So we continued with vision therapy and continued with that prescription. So again, highly unusual. I mean, in school, you're told to give maximum plus. You're supposed to, particularly for an esotrope. So +2 seems like random and too little. But again, she finished vision therapy. She's been happy with the +2s. And I think we ended up fitting her with contacts, and she was very happy. A concussion case, and showing some minus on auto, which wasn't really there. A lot of ocular motor problems, which is very typical with concussion. Typically with concussion, you also have CI type problems. She had a good, decent NPC 3.5, a little exo, plano behind the phoropter, reduced amps, reduced NRA-PRA. So they often have accommodative problems. There's tons of literature on concussion and CI, accommodative binocular problems. You can look up Ken Kafrida's work, but decent ranges. So, and that was pretty good. So it's really more symptomatic. So we ended up giving her the +50 half in, the half in because of the exo finding. And then mu upsilon. Mu upsilon is an aqua color or a blue color. So we just said do that 20 minutes a day, and she still was having some headaches, but overall things were a little better. Actually, the retinoscopy was better, the NRA-PRA was better, amps were a little bit better, and ranges and recoveries were pretty good. So I think we basically just, and that looks really good. And we just said, continue with that. She didn't need vision therapy. She discontinued the colored light therapy and just use that as needed until she didn't have any symptoms anymore. One more case, and then I can take questions probably. All right, so Strep syndrome. You might have heard of that. It's also called bilateral juvenile amblyopia. And that's like that case that had the reduced color vision that I mentioned from Wednesday. Here's another one, best corrected. Well, actually, she was only giving 20/80. Best corrected was 20/70. She really only was taking like -1/4. And even when I gave her the -1/4 or -50, wasn't helping. She had poor pursuits, very reduced stereo. She was, I think, 10 or 11. I didn't put that in there, but also reduced ranges and recoveries. So gave her the +50 half in. And I just tried them because sometimes, like I said, I keep glasses around. So sometimes I have the 0.37, sometimes I have the 0.5. That gave her the 20/20. I think I went with the 0.37 because she was still showing some minus, so I didn't want to push the plus. And then, I don't have the follow-up, but she came back and she was 20/20, which is pretty typical. This one I'll run through. Very, very limited language, squinting, tilting, bumping into things. And the NPC was only 12 inches, showing a little minus, but essentially plano. With +51 basin, and I went with the 1 because the NPC was so poor. And that gave 5 inches, 7 inches, and he did not look away when he caught the ball on a Marston ball. So again, did some performance testing. That's his copy forms at 8 years of age, which is more like a 5-year-old, and that's what we gave him. And I've been seeing him for years. He still uses the 1 basin. Over time, for some reason, he ended up developing some astigmatism, which I did correct for. Visual hygiene, as I mentioned, is really important. Here's just a few things: making sure that you teach them to read in a relaxed manner with good posture and proper lighting. Take lots of breaks with movement, so don't just like glance up for a second and then go back down. Tell them to look out in the distance frequently. An incline is usually helpful for the younger people too, and looking at what their workstation is like, making sure that it's comfortable. Teaching them to breathe and blink and be aware of the periphery. Making sure they have good visual hygiene, not eating junk foods, getting sleep, staying hydrated, exercising, and limiting that screen time. So these are all things that I think are important to talk to our patients about, because we definitely have really powerful tools and they can make immediate and amazing differences. And we can expand their capacity, because if they're struggling because of visual challenges that can be remediated or treated with lenses and prisms in a way that we didn't learn in school, then I believe it's our job to really learn it and start utilizing it. Here's a bunch of good websites. As I said, if anybody wants the PowerPoint, I'll give it to Romola and pass it on to you. All right, so anybody want to, let me stop the share. Does anybody have any questions?
So
Or
for
one?
ADHD kids, if you had to just prescribe, would you do like base up?
Yes, you could. If they're really ADD and you don't think that they're going to come for vision therapy, you could give a half base up. If they are exo, I'm more likely to give a base in though instead.
Okay. And if they, a lot of ADHD kids have like memory problems. Do you find that improves that because their attention is better?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have seen though, when I have prescribed the base up, well, I didn't, but I worked in Mel Kaplan's practice and he prescribed base up a lot. I did see myopic progression, so I'm a little bit less likely to prescribe
For
a
kids.
base up.
What about Do you do it for adults?
Yes, actually, it is pretty helpful for adults that have trouble with concentration. And there, again, I might only do 1/2 to 1. I don't think I've ever prescribed the 2 that I mentioned that Gus Fortiotis did.
And wouldn't base in kind of like expand their vision, but maybe make them more distracted?
You would think, but if they're an exo, it doesn't.
Okay.
Part of it is because it slows down time and it expands the field, but it also calms that nervous system so that they actually breathe better. So sometimes, when I would say more often than not, people that have focusing and concentration problems, it's because they're in a general state of anxiety much of the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So when you can calm that nervous system, now they can attend better.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't mention it there, but I do often tell people to listen to meditative music or relaxing music, or I'll tell them to do yoga or meditate or whatever as well. As I said, probably the biggest thing is just check performance. I mean, it takes a few seconds to just try something and see if it works, and then see if they read better or hit the ball better or whatever it is. Even before I really knew how to do lenses and prisms in this fashion, I always trial framed. I think trial framing is really important because you never know how they're going to respond. I mean, you've got them behind a phoropter. They're in the dark. They have just these tiny little windows to look through. They don't have that whole spatial picture. So very often I'll just, whatever I find, I'll take it out, I'll drop the sill and I'll reduce the minus a little bit and see how they do. Or I'll just try, +1/4, +50, +75 for near and see if it helps. I like having flippers all made up, so you can get flippers that have like +50 or even one of each. You can make them up yourself, get a plus and minus 1/4 and plus and minus 50. This way you can just show it, or just make sure you have like plus and minus 50 and plus and minus 1/4 flippers in the exam room so that you can just throw it on and see how they do, either over their old glasses or try, right there.
If you're prescribing for the first time, how often do you follow up, or how quick do you follow up with the patient?
Depends on the age, and it depends on what I'm prescribing. So, I mean, if it's an adult that just needs driving glasses, then I probably will just see them yearly. If it's a kid, I'm prescribing in a non-compensating manner, I want to see them back in 3 months. If I end up giving them a compensatory prescription, but a reduced prescription, so say they are like a -150, but I end up just giving them -1s because it's their first prescription and they're like 12, I most likely will see them back within 6 months. But that's a good question, because I do think the follow-up is really important, and I think you want to make sure that you're guiding that individual. So if it's a Prism prescription that's therapeutic or stress relieving, I almost always see them within 3 or 4 months. So, any other questions? I'm just going to take a drink.
Hi, Randy. Great lecture. Thank you.
Hi, Ozzy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite. I really appreciate that. Couple of questions. So you mentioned about the base up, that you are a little bit cautious about that because the patient might go become myopic. What are your thoughts on for the patients that they are hyperopic, or the strap patient with hyperopia? If we do a base up, does that help with bringing that hyperopia down, or that's a different discussion?
I actually never thought about that, but that could be a possibility. I have not done the base up for high hyperopia because I tend to just drop the plus and give them a therapy prescription, tell them to wear it 1 or 2 hours a day.
Right.
But I guess you could consider that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just haven't.
Awesome. And then I have one more question. I have this 5-year-old that he used to have a constant left ESO about 25-30 diopter since he was 18 months old and been going to the ophthalmology and doing patching and all that. And for about, let's say about 3 years, when he came to my office, he was wearing a plus 25 sphere on the right eye and about a 650 on the left eye. About a 20/30, 20/40 acuity on the right eye, no stereo. And on left eye, he was 20/100. When I saw him and do the near retinoscopy and everything, I cut down the prescription to +3 OU. Then did vision therapy with him. We do a lot of MFBF and red green and all that. And his turn changed a lot. I put the binasal on as well, and he's not turning most of the time. He's intermittently turning if he's really paying attention to something small at near. But what happened is when I cut down the glasses to +3 with binasal, he was not wearing the glasses all the time when he was putting the red green glasses on. And all of a sudden, I started with him, let's say, in August, and then in October, at the beginning of October, he was straight. And his visual acuity was 20/20 on the right eye and about 20/30 on the left eye and 20/25 plus with single letter on the left eye. So we made a huge progress with him. But then all of a sudden, I saw that he started turning again. I asked Dad that he brings him to the therapy all the time. So what's going on? He said, yeah, when he does therapy at home, he doesn't wear his prescription glasses because 2 glasses on the top of each other is not easy for him. So he started turning. Educate that you have to have the glasses on all the time. So what happens is he's not turning much right now, but his visual acuity on the left eye dropped to 20/100 and it's not coming up. So I want to know, what can I do? Can I add some prisms, something to stimulate? What do you suggest?
I had a case very similar to that recently. So one of the things that I should mention is I do look at the timing. So, when am I seeing them? You'll definitely see a myopic shift towards the end of a school year. And then the beginning of the school year, they've, gone through the summer. So they actually then oftentimes take off their glasses. So they'll be less myopic. So I definitely look at, what the progression is and where they are. But yes, sometimes they just stop wearing the glasses. And then that can create problems. So I had a little guy that was just like that. And he had, we had done vision therapy. It was like originally 2200. We had gotten him down to like 2040. And then I saw him again. He had stopped wearing his glasses and it was back up to 2080. So we actually just put him back in vision therapy. And I said, you have to wear them, at least 6 hours a day. It was just, sometimes you just have to do that because they just don't want to wear them all the time. And then I'd be concerned too with the strab. If they're trying to do red-green activities without a prescription, you don't want them embedding any kind of ARC, or doing it wrong. So yes, I would insist, at least for vision therapy, to wear the therapy glasses. And then, sometimes you just have to start back up again. Sometimes they had a big growth spurt. And all of a sudden, things are worse. And that was this guy too, Gavin. He actually had a really big growth spurt. And then because of the homeschooling, he had stopped wearing his glasses. He was back and forth, but I guess between whenever Thanksgiving and then they didn't start back in school again until February, he stopped wearing his glasses at home. So then, he had the reduction. We just started in therapy again, and it came back pretty quickly. So I would suspect that if you get him back in therapy, it should come back. But yeah, you also have to ask the right questions because, it's true. Patients sometimes they just don't follow what your recommendations are, or I mean, if you're in practice long enough, you'll see this. They come in wearing their brother's glasses, or they come in wearing, prescriptions from 3 times ago because they broke the new ones and it's been a year before they could get in to see you. I mean, people do funny things. That's why I do think regular follow-up is really important. It's much more important for the kids because things can change. I mean, I literally will see people come back 5 years later and, there's now a problem because the glasses, I mean, I've seen kids wear glasses that they got in kindergarten in 4th grade. And I'm like, now the PD is all off and now they're, inducing base-in prism that shouldn't be there. So regular follow-up is really crucial for this kind of care.
So Randy, he is still in therapy. We didn't even stop anything.
But he stopped using them at home.
No, he's using them starting.
Oh, he is.
Yeah, starting let's say November, when we caught it, and I talked to Dad. Dad says no, he has it on all the time except for shower time. But the turn is much better, but the acuity is not coming up, and he's using the Syntonics as well, the goggles for strap amblyopia as well.
So do you use the AmblyINet? I like to use some programs that really do a lot more fine detail MFBF. So, having him do coloring in the O's. I mean, you really have to engage that left eye. So I would be doing a lot more fine detail type activities with him.
Okay. What are your thoughts on patching the good eye at bedtime? Do you do that at all?
I don't anymore. I really used to do patching. I don't really do much patching anymore.
No, patching the good eye at bedtime when they are sleeping, not the weak eye, the better eye. I'm sorry, the weaker eye, the left eye, which is the amblyopic eye, at bedtime. So when it's dark, no? No,
I really don't do much patching. I'd rather do more MFBF stuff. I mean, that's a case where it also would be good to maybe do some associateds and then see, but do things where there's detail. So maybe the Marsden ball with letters on it, and then can he call out the letters, or, do amp push-ups with dissociated prisms.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good questions, though.
Thanks.
All right. And I'm sure there's like a million things that you guys will come across and can think of. I'm happy to answer them. You can always get my email too if you have any questions later on. As he knows, you can just say, oh, what would you do with this kind of case or that kind of case? My feeling is make some up when you do get into practice, or at least try things, trial lenses, and then just see what kind of observations and changes you can get. Use the Bernal yoked prisms in therapy, and make observations of right, left, up, down, dissociated when you're in the therapy room. See what kind of changes you can get. Watch posture, watch balance, watch movement patterns. This stuff is really, really important, and you can see so many changes. Celia Henricks and I are coming up with a 2-day lecture on multisensory systems and really looking at proprioception, balance, vestibular, auditory, cognition, attention, awareness, memory, and as it relates to vision, and then really looking at, okay, what kind of changes can we get with lenses and prisms? I mean, again, when I was in school, I had no clue that a plus lens would actually cause me to breathe better. It's just like, that was not anything that we ever discussed, or if we did, I missed it. But it really can make some big differences. So I'll just play with lenses and prisms in the therapy room, in the exam room, and find what's going to have that patient just feel more comfortable with. I don't know if anybody wants to share something that they saw recently in my office. Don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but feel free.
Okay. So I actually did visit Dr. Schulman's office recently. I brought my brother in because he is autistic. He hasn't been seen by a behavioral optometrist before. He has been seen by a regular optometrist once at a school that he was in, but they really just gave him a low minus prescription, which he never wore ever again. So Dr. Schulman took him in, and it was a really good exam. He's a type that needs a lot of structure, and he needs repetition on what's going to happen. So it was very interesting the way that Dr. Schulman approached the exam. She gave him 10 items, 10 things that she needed to check off. And so trying to give him a time that when he would finish. So 2:10 is when you're going to finish. And then every time he kept talking and kept delaying the exam, she'd be like, all right, now it's 2:15. But it was very interesting because it kept him on task. At the end of the day, ended up giving him a low minus and a base in Prism. How much was it, Dr. Schulman?
It was one in. It was, just one in. And what was he, -3, I think?
Yeah, I think between -2 and -3.
Yeah, and we gave him a less than that, maybe even 2 or less. But we just watched him look at a ball on a string, the Marsden ball. And he was very verbal. He just kept talking about, when are we going to go? When are we going to go? When are we going to go? And he just wasn't really engaging with the ball. And then you put the base in Prism with a little bit of minus, and you could just see his whole demeanor. He just calmed down. He stopped talking and he started to track the ball, and he, engaged with it. And then what did he say? He said something funny. He was like,
I think someone asked him like, "Oh, did you do good today? How'd you do?" And he's like, "Oh, I did great."
it was really, but yeah, he was like, "I did great."
He was so sure of himself, but it was very profound, the difference in his behavior.
Yeah.
That was really, and what was also interesting is when he took off the glasses, that behavior still persisted for a couple more minutes, which I remember you mentioned it was like an after effect of the Prism.
Yeah, that's what I said. Watch what happens when you move them. Because sometimes people say, like I'll have somebody read, and they read so much better with the glasses on. So the parent will say, oh, well, should they be wearing for sports or, for everything? And I say, no, you actually are changing the way the brain is engaging with their environment. So actually, when you take them off, you'll still have an effect. So, just by wearing them, it's like, oh, that's how I'm supposed to see. And even when you take them off, you'll see it'll start to wear, especially with that population. I've just been working with kids, people on spectrum forever, and you'll see they actually will stay calmer even when you take the glasses off. Which is pretty amazing. But, again, it's because you're changing the brain. You're changing the way that light energy is coming in. So you're going to change the way that they're going to process that information. So they're tools, they're therapeutic tools. And, you just want to be creative with them and try different things. And he was very exo, he had an exo posture, also a turn and a twist too, and kept his head down so he can keep his eyes up and out. So, a true CI. That's why I went with the base in Prism. But yeah, you could make a case for, we could have given him base up Prism, so that would change his posture, bring him down and in even more. But then he'd have to write himself. If I were working with him in therapy, I might do that. I might have him. In fact, I've done that with patients where I just, for 6 weeks, especially when they're very agitated, it might be hard to work with some populations, or they're really young, like 3 to 5 year olds. I might just send them home with a rotating Prism homework where they actually have to do 10 minutes each direction every day for 6 weeks, and then we come back in and we check them. So if I'm going to be working in a difficult population, a young population, or it's an unknown, or even, as I mentioned, the field loss cases, I might just send them home with base right and base left and do it for 3 to 6 weeks or even 8 weeks, and then come back and check. Remember, if I'm prescribing something, I might check them back in 3 or 4 months. But if I actually want to move them and do a therapeutic program, I often will see them in 3 to 6 weeks. Thank you for sharing that, Rebecca.
Thank you for your patience.
No.
That was amazing.
Any other questions about prescribing or vision therapy, utilizing lenses and prisms?
Hey, Andy, I had a question for you.
Sure. Hi, Jen.
Hey, how are you doing? Looking good. So, thanks again for inviting me tonight, or today. Feels like it's been a little while. I wanted to ask you about progressives because, prescribing plus Admir for a kid, a lot of the kids around here are back in classrooms 5 days a week, elementary schools and things like that. But, even in regular times, kids are in the classroom. So many kids have accommodations to be toward the front of the class for attention, for so many reasons. They can't put 20 kids in the front of the classroom when there are only, 28 kids in the classroom. So, they need to be able to see a distance. So if you're going to prescribe them, do you always stay with a single vision? Do you always do aligned bifocal? Do you avoid progressives? Do you do progressive? Like, how do you prescribe for them? Because I'm non-dispensing and I'm finding that kind of practical question to be one of my most difficult questions right now.
That's a really good question too. I would say, for kindergarten, first grade, really not, or even second, I very often do not prescribe the bifocal, but certainly in the upper grades, they're doing a lot of looking up and down. So then I am much more likely to prescribe a bifocal for myope. And also, you can certainly give bifocals for hyperopes too. That might be ESO or whatever. Although, as I said, I'm probably going to go with the plus that matches or is somewhere near where the near red is, the NRA, PRA gets balanced, and what the FCC is. So I'm definitely making sure that I'm looking at, all the findings. But yeah, in that third, fourth grade and above, yes, I would give a bifocal. I do prefer the flat tops, but then of course, the kids don't like the line, or the parents were progressive and they want the progressive. So I will use the iZen lens if it's a lower plus. That has been helpful for some cases, but I've also had some that hated it. So, you can kind of figure out what you want to do, but that's again more for the low plus. I will use round segs. So round segs are another option. They're a little smaller because they're usually like a 22, but at least you don't have this distortion that you get in a progressive. The only time I'll use the progressive is an aggressive myope that has a ESO tendency. Then I will do the progressive if needed.
Do you ever prescribe, again, this is just from a practical standpoint, do you ever advise the families to get both a single vision and progressive to find the
Yes. That's another good question. Again, multiple prescriptions. I will prescribe a single vision for sports or for, out and about, and then the bifocal for the classroom. And then I've also done it where, maybe they have an older prescription and then the PD might be a millimeter off, but then I'll say, well, use that prescription on the weekends and use the new bifocal for, during the week. So you can be creative. Even contact lens wearers, sometimes I'll say, okay, during the week, you're on the computer all day, wear your -2s, and then buy one box of, the -225s or the 250s for the weekends and going out and about. I do that myself, or did that myself for years. And I've been not wearing my contacts as much, but yeah, I have different powers for different things. So yeah, don't forget to do that. I think it's really important to, prescribe for what their needs are and what the demands are.
Yeah. I think it's the non-dispensing practice that the thing that I'm running into is I have to send them out to someone else, right? Like all your practices
So I always tell my patients if they get their prescription elsewhere to please bring them back to me to make sure it's filled correctly. So this way you can check to make sure it's done correctly. And then you can get to know who prescribes properly to your specifications. So always put your optical recommendations down. You know, it is a prescription, so you want it filled the way you want it. So when I prescribe Prism, I always write, please grind in Prism, you know, as specified, because sometimes if you give like one base down OU, they get all confused. They only know that the vertical is one base down in one eye and not two. So sometimes the patient will come back and they only have the Prism in one eye. So I always hand write or whatever, print out a prescription that is very specific, you know, bisect lower eye. Yeah. Yeah, no, you have to be really, really specific, and you have to, you know, ask for what you ask for, and then make sure that it gets filled correctly. The other thing is people are really sloppy with PDs, you know, and you saw the slides. I mean, a minus lens is effectively a base out prism, depending on where your eye lands. So you want to make sure that you put the PD in and specify for what it is, because I've seen prescriptions go out where I say, you know, distance near, and then they decide to fill only the distance or only the near, and then they use the distance prescription or the distance PD. So just make sure the PDs are correct and then dot them when they come in, you know, from an outside place, if you don't dispense, to make sure it's filled correctly, because there's so many errors. I can't tell you. I mean, that's one of the things, because we precept and I have students from all different schools. I actually had a crew say, why should we do lensometry? We were a little slow. I said, please do some lensometry. And they said, why should we do lensometry? I said, because people are going to come in with the wrong prescription, and you need to know that. And that happens a lot. I mean, I've had people come in and they're struggling because the frame was the same on both sides and they had swapped the lenses. So if you swap the lenses and you don't check the PD and dot the people and know where that lens is, it could look like it's fine, the measurement's the same, but now they're getting, you know, the equivalent of 4 base in OU. So you really have to make sure that it's filled correctly and that it's, you know, where it should be. I've seen weird things. I mean, you see flat tops that are like this, or you see prescriptions where there's a 1/2 to 1 base down in one eye versus the other, and it's not, or there's a big difference and they didn't correct for vertical displacement. I mean, I didn't love optics myself, but it is really important to make sure that you know what you're doing and that you can do a good lensometry and make sure that you understand the effects if it's off. I can also tell you that, say I want some base in or I want some base down, but I don't really think the patient's really going to follow through or follow up with me, I actually will purposely decenter it, or I might change the PD so that they get some base in or base out effects or base down, or I'll dot them and change the OC, optical center, so that it will be therapeutic. So it's just another thing to think about.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the questions. Why don't I wanted to try to finish up about 4:15. So why don't we just take a couple more questions if anybody has any. Then you guys can enjoy the rest of your weekend, hopefully, unless you're working tomorrow. Probably working tomorrow. I actually took off because I had to work today. But I do usually work Saturdays. because I mentioned it, I will just say briefly about tints. So remember, with any prescription, you can add tints to it. And you might have heard the FL41 or the blue tints are really good. And I mentioned the mu upsilon for the TBI patients. I do think that tints can be effective. I get a little concerned with people that prescribe darker tints, because that actually can make you more light sensitive if you're wearing a tinted prescription full time. So then when you take it off, patients actually have more problems. So I really tend to only use small amounts. So you can do 5 or 10% tints. That can actually help a lot. And again, it's the same concept. Keep some of the tints available for them to try and see how they feel with it, so that you know what's going to be effective for the patient. I actually had a patient, oh, this was such a sad case on Wednesday, 17-year-old. He had he was actually walking and got hit by a car. So he landed on his head, but I guess the contra-Q, so I guess there was injury here and in the back of his head. And an all-star athlete, football player, baseball player, was a senior in high school, and he wasn't himself after the injury. And then somehow he actually started to get worse. So we're not sure what to do with him right now, because we just saw him, and mom thinks maybe he ended up having a stroke in January, because somehow the accident was in October. January, he actually declined considerably, not talking, shuffling when he's walking, and not eating, lost a lot of weight. So I said he should see a neuroendocrinologist as well as a neuroimmunologist, because post injury, you can often have disruptions in your whole adrenal function. And then we talked about that whole general adaptation syndrome. Hans Selye, I just mentioned about the autonomic nervous system. So I think his autonomic nervous system just like crashed somehow, because he's just had no affect. He wouldn't answer any questions. I really had a tough time doing the exam. But I happened to keep glasses that had different tints on him, and he really wouldn't do much in the exam room. Took him into the vision therapy room. He actually had, again, a nice, lovely posture all the way down into the side. He would only look down into the right or down into the left. And with Hirschberg, I saw an exotropia. He did one time, a slight convergence, but only till about 14 inches. So I tried some base in on him. Again, just tapped the Marsden ball. He just stood in front of it. He wouldn't even look at it at all, did not track it. Base in, I got a little bit of tracking just in one corner. And then I tried just a blue tint, just blue tinted glasses, threw them on, and then he actually did track it. And he tracked it for maybe 10 seconds. So again, I didn't know what to do with him because it's pretty complex. So I said, take home the blue tinted glasses, come back in 2 weeks. They were going for a contrast MRI. They had the MRI in November and it was fine. And I said, you know what, and I did like a video review of the mom's phone, just looking at pictures of him. And it just looked like the posture had just declined further. And it looked like one side of his face was down a little bit in one photo. So I said, you know what, he might have had a stroke. So he's going for the contrast MRI on Tuesday. And I said, try the tinted glasses and see how he does. So we'll see. I mean, even if it gets him some movement and if it calms that nervous system down so he can gauge a little bit, it'll be worth it. But yeah, it's like you try anything. And I tried probably 5 different tints and glasses with him to see what would engage him. And it was only the blue tint that he would track. So again, you never know what you're going to find and how they're going to respond. We see a ton of TBI, and there's been so many that just small prescriptions actually make a big difference. I had another one where just walking, his right leg would like just swing out every time he walked, and had a little bit of a head turn. We played around with Prisms. I ended up giving him, I think it was maybe 5 yoked but oblique. So it was like base down at axis 125. I don't remember exactly what it was, in one eye, and then whatever the corresponding 90 degrees in the other eye, and just walk straight. Oh, that was an interesting case. That was what it was. His left ear infection. He had a really bad left ear infection. And then after the ear infection, he had dizziness, balance problems, focusing problems. He had been to, 2 or 3 ENTs, neurologists. Nobody could find anything that would help him. We tried those glasses on. He walked normally. He said the humming in his ear went away. Now, again, how did that happen? I don't know. But we said, let's try the glasses, make them up, and then come back in 3 or 4 weeks after using them. And then if he still has some balance problems, we'll do vision therapy. But again, we videotape it, we just watch, and we see what changes. I do have a YouTube channel. Again, some of them are on there. We're still trying to upload them, but I have pictures of patients with and without glasses, walking, moving, and you can see the differences that are really obvious. So as I said, play around with it, utilize some of those prescribing protocols, and see what you find. So any other questions, thoughts?
I hate to be that person that extends the lecture. Can I ask a question on that one last case that you just discussed?
Sure.
How do you get from the point of, wow, dude, you walk funny, to here, put on these glasses with oblique prism. Wow, you're walking straight. Like, there had to be a couple steps in between those 2 moments, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm still doing a full evaluation. I'm still looking at all my findings. And if I see that there's a visual problem, for example, tracking wasn't great, binocular skills were not great. And even just doing a near point of convergence, you see a little bit of a turn. I also often do like I'll test the midline shift.
Yeah.
So I'll ask them to tell me when it looks like it's right in front of their eyes, like right in line with their nose. And then I'll come from the other side, tell me when it's right in line with your nose. And if it's like shifted way over here, I know that the visual system is disrupted. So in that ear case, things were shifted over to that, I think it was the right side. So again, that's why I'm going to try some prisms that were, I think it was bilateral. So it was giving him some base down and base right, or whatever it was. I don't remember exactly. That would be why I'd do it. So yes, it's based on findings. It's not like, oh, let me pull this out of my butt.
No, I didn't know if it was just the postural observations, like you were speaking of different people you've worked with who just make postural observations and say, we need this.
Yeah, no, I mean, if they have perfect visual skills and there's nothing there, then I'm going to think, well, they might just have had like a shoulder injury, or, sometimes it's just facial asymmetry. You can see like one eye's a little bit higher, but they don't report aphoria. Everything's fine. Then I'm going to say, well, it's not so likely visual in nature. But yes, if they've got anything visual that's not where it should be, then I'm going to say, okay, let me try something in my visual toolbox. So, yeah, but that's a good question too. I did not mention that.
No, that's great. That's great information. Thank you.
No, you're very welcome. And thanks for getting on. And thank you everybody for listening in. As I said, if you think of something later, just let me know.